The table stretches so far you're convinced it bends with the curvature of the earth. Gilded platters the size of small rowboats are arranged in perfect symmetry. Each holds a dish so elaborate, so glittering you half expect it to be singing. And curiosity is the real hunger that never leaves. It's a kind of invitation. Not this, something deeper. You frown. What crumbs? But here's your odd historical detail. Some noble households had a designated official called the almoner whose job was to collect uneaten food and distribute it to the needy. However, some almoners were accused of sampling extensively during their duties. A 15th century English household record lists 3 missing hams and 1 pudding stolen or gifted, and the chestnut. For now, you let yourself rest in the warm, sticky glow of the table no one planned, no one praised, and no one polished. And somehow it feels like home. Sure enough, when you look back at the salvage table, you notice a trail of tiny breadcrumbs leading away from the hearth. Not messy, not accidental, deliberate. When you're ready, she says, follow the crumbs. A crooked custard tart still sweet. You don't follow, not yet. You're too full, too content. She sits beside you and places a hand on the box you're still clutching. You're going to open it eventually, aren't you? But she shakes her head. But you know tomorrow you'll be curious again. Someone snorts. Everything down here is better than the version upstairs. She smiles, you'll see. But down here it's about survival. She stands brushing crumbs off her apron. You shrug. I don't know. Maybe I like the mystery. You glance at the table. At the collapsing puddings, the sideways tarts, the smiling faces. This already feels like a secret. To what? She leans in close. To a part of the feast no one talks about. You inspect it. It's white, gooey, lumpy. Not exactly elegant, but it smells like almond milk and honey. And when you take a bite, it melts into nostalgia. She nods thoughtfully. Fair, but you should know, it's not just a snack. As you sip warm cider from a chipped mug, someone taps your shoulder. Small linen scrolls stained with caramel and ink, sketched with the journey sugar took from India through the Islamic world into Europe, oh, just not with food. You learn that the apprentice baker has a crush on the royal gardener and has been making flower-shaped bread loaves as a coded confession. It's the girl from earlier, the one with the chestnut comment. These are the stories no one writes down, but they feed the soul better than any gilded pear. Not survival as in desperate hunger, but the quiet, joyful survival of dignity, humor, and truth. Of the idea that even if your goose falls apart or your custard droops, someone will still take a bite and say, huh, that's not bad. 'Cause upstairs food is about power. And your open scholarly question. Was the salvage table a genuine act of communal resourcefulness or simply a culinary loophole, a quiet rebellion under the guise of thrift? But that, my friend, is tomorrow's curiosity. You learn that someone once made a cake that looked exactly like the Queen's hat and accidentally sent it to the banquet. The Queen reportedly had no idea and took 3 bites before realizing she was eating a millinery masterpiece. You learn that one cook is secretly writing a cookbook filled entirely with recipes that shouldn't exist, like candied onions stuffed with mackerel or spinach folded into chocolate. You're beginning to think the salvage table is where the heart of the feast truly lives. You eat and listen and laugh. This might be better than the version upstairs, you say. What's that, you ask? You're not sure what memories it brings because you've never tasted it before. But somehow it feels like you're 7 years old, it's snowing outside, and someone just told you a story about moonlight. She nods solemnly. It collapsed. You sit. There are no velvet chairs here, just a wobbly stool. You're handed a carved wooden spoon still warm from the dishwater. There's no ceremony, no drum roll, no silver trumpet, only the quiet pleasure of scooping something imperfect and real into your mouth. This, she declares, was going to be a swan-shaped blancmange. You blink. Was going to be. There's a whole poached pear swimming in gravy next to a tray of flat cakes that look like someone sat on them. There are broken tarts, mangled puddings, and roast vegetables arranged in what appears to be alphabetical order, though no one seems to agree on the alphabet. Back at the table, a new dish arrives. It's round, soft, covered in something syrupy and unclear. A cook sets it down with pride. You blink, and now, this might be a good time to mention salvaging food was deeply embedded in medieval kitchens, especially large, noble ones. Nothing was ever truly wasted, not out of charity or virtue, but because everything cost time, labor, and prestige. A pie crust took hours to prepare. Sugar was weighed like treasure. Even breadcrumbs were swept, saved, and used again. A pie that cracked down the middle, still edible. She grins, now it's mine. This leads us to your common historical fact. In medieval Europe, the concept of waste wasn't just economic, it was symbolic. Leftovers were often redistributed to servants' monasteries or the poor. In noble households, this was seen as a reflection of the Lord's generosity, but it also served to maintain social order. It's delicious. Tonight you let yourself laugh with the kitchen crowd. A goose leg that no one can identify as part of the goose, still technically dinner. And tonight it's all yours to explore. The kitchen you enter now is smaller, older, and much messier than the grand preparation halls you imagined earlier. Copper pots hang from soot-darkened beams. The hearth is wide enough to walk into. And in the center, surrounded by cooks in various states of giddiness and exhaustion, stands a long wooden table piled with everything. This is the salvage table, a nightly tradition. Here's how it works: every dish that didn't make it to the main hall or that was made incorrectly, too early, or too weird ends up here. It's a chaotic symphony of second chances. The girl grins, you'll see, but bring a spoon and maybe a sense of humor. The corridor narrows, the laughter grows louder. A dog trots past with a piece of bread in its mouth, tail wagging. You glance behind you. The chestnut box still rests in your palm, warm, silent, and slightly heavy. You haven't opened it, and at this point, you're not even sure you want to. It's better as a mystery. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find out why none of the nobles ever seem hungry. You're not entirely sure what that is, but the name sounds delightfully suspicious, like a table that refuses to be thrown away, or a table that eats other tables in the night. You smile at the thought, not the dining hall, because they're full. You follow the scent first. It curls down the corridor like a mischievous whisper: butter, cinnamon, toasted oats, and something deep and nutty that reminds you of toasted walnuts on a winter morning. It's not elegant. It's not refined. It's comfort. And it's headed towards something called the salvage table. You follow the smell of cinnamon and the sound of mischief into a room where nothing is beautiful, but everything is good. Dim those lights, fire up a fan for that cozy background sound, and let's settle in for the journey ahead. Still waiting. Down here, the great banquet is still going upstairs. They're probably toasting their 5th goblet of rose water, exchanging compliments on a jelly shaped like a sea serpent no one will eat. And she walks away carrying a tray of something bubbling. The feast, at least the noble one, is ending, which means yours might just be beginning. Because after midnight, according to kitchen tradition, comes the salvage table. Midnight. You open your mouth to reply, but a bell rings again, this time from deep inside the palace. Someone leans over. A young cook, her apron stained with carrot pulp and pride. She glances at the box, the clock tower. She pauses. You haven't eaten it, she asks. You look down at the wooden box beside you, now slightly dusty from flour and breadcrumbs. It's still warm, still untouched, still watching. You shake your head. She smiles. Good means you still have questions. Most don't. Then without another word, he leaves through the same hidden passage he came from. And apparently he eats here. And is that why you've been given the chestnut? And your delightfully odd detail. One account from 15th century Burgundy describes a mock duck, not to be confused with the vegetarian kind, made of turnips dyed brown and stuffed with cooked peas. It was reportedly served with great pomp, to the delight of every kitchen worker and the confusion of one visiting monk. You hear whispers low and cautious. The mock course, as it turns out, is a long-standing servant tradition. Once the nobles have been properly mesmerized by their jeweled beets and marzipan castles, the kitchen staff puts on a show of their own culinary satire. Has he already tasted it all? Or is this the only food he trusts? And now the room is very quiet, which leads us to your next question. If the royal taster is eating here in this room, what does that say about the food out there? Most tasters were trained to detect common poisons. Some even took antidotes daily just in case. They were often trusted above most other court members. After all, who else literally risked death every day for the crown? The door you entered through clicks shut. You walk through the archway, and there it is, the banquet. The role of a royal food taster was both prestigious and terrifying. Their job was to sample each dish served to the monarch and ensure it was safe. Not delicious safe. Yes, apparently yes. Here's one, a roasted peacock not plucked but redressed in its own feathers. It's perched upright on a throne of parsley beak, open as if it's about to caw poetry. Nearby, a pie crust shaped like a turreted castle spills out almond cream and gold foil roses. You blink. The taster. The king's official food tester. The one who risks his life for every roast swan and honey glaze. The royal one. That's the taster. He smiles. It always is back here. You nod. Is the food good? He asks. The door swings softly shut behind him. He stops near you. He doesn't speak. Just walks slowly between the tables, nodding slightly, observing. Everyone stiffens just a little. The custard helmet disappears under the table. The crown-shaped tart vanishes behind someone's sleeve. And a few moments later, someone enters from the opposite side. Not a servant, not a steward. The laughter fades. He's going to love that, she says with a wink. A tall man in formal robes marked with the king's crest steps into the room. No one notices at first, but you do. One is a boot. Another is a rather rude-looking turnip. Someone laughs so hard they nearly fall off the bench. This isn't your average feast. This is spectacle. And then something strange happens. The room cheers. You raise yours too, unsure what it means, but enjoying the rhythm of belonging. Your chest feels light. Full, yes, but not just with food. With a secret sense of joy that didn't exist under the chandeliers. Back in the hall, someone raises a mug and shouts, "To the pie that didn't sing." It's not rebellion, it's tradition, and maybe just a little rebellion. And now your open scholarly question. Were these mock courses an innocent indulgence or a subtle form of social resistance disguised as culinary fun? A harmless joke or a coded critique of feasting excess? This brings us to your common historical fact. Medieval kitchens weren't silent, grim places. They were full of laughter, gossip, and occasionally edible commentary. Some manor records even suggest that kitchen feasts were allowed as reward, especially after particularly extravagant noble dinners. Historically, we do have evidence, though scattered, of mock banquets and kitchen satire among the lower ranks in medieval households. These were often private affairs, part of feasting culture below stairs. While nobles used food to express power and virtue, servants sometimes used it to comment, to joke, and to flip the script quite literally. And you realize this is the other half of the feast. The nobles show off their wealth. The servants, they show off their wit. One of the cooks explains between bites of something yellow and crunchy. We copy their food, but worse and better. Depends who's judging. Another servant holds up a pastry shaped like the king's crown, with two tiny sugar feet sticking out the bottom. This isn't the after party, this is the real party. It's performance, it's parody, it's brilliant. You can't help but grin. A custard molded to look like a knight's helmet with jam oozing out the visor. Tonight's lineup includes a cake shaped like a purse filled with lentils and labeled for the dowry. A roast pigeon made entirely from mashed beans and dyed with beet juice. Not because it's the best thing you've ever tasted, though it might be, but because of what it isn't. It isn't shaped like a dolphin. It isn't studded with cloves in the shape of a family crest. It isn't even sliced neatly. It's just pie. Messy, delicious, warm as a furnace pie. A boy beside you leans in and whispers, "We call it the mock course." The door creaks again and two young women enter carrying trays of what appear to be bread sculptures. But not the usual kind. These aren't shaped like doves or dragons. They're shaped like, well, jokes. The servants' hall hums like a beehive, happy, loud, a little chaotic. One man dunks a hunk of bread into a bowl of onions and ale. Another wraps honeyed carrots in roasted cabbage and calls it a nobleman's burrito. There are kids, actual children, passing mugs of cider, and someone's great-aunt is singing a song about turnips with 17 verses. No one's grading your posture or commenting on how many times you chew. You are for the first time all evening completely free. He offers you a slice of pie, flaky leaking apricot, and adds, "Truth is every feast has two stories, the one on the table and the one behind the door." You finish your pie in quiet astonishment. There are no velvet chairs, no crystal spoons, just wooden benches and real hunger. And no one's watching you eat it. No one claps, no one gasps. Now for your scholarly question. Were these dual layers of consumption a sign of generosity sharing with the lower ranks, or a clever means of preserving appearances while outsourcing the act of eating? A long wooden table runs through the center. It is covered in dishes you recognize, sort of. There's a roast swan here too, but this one looks tender. It's glazed dark and sticky. There's a pie, less castle, more crumble. A tower of apples baked with cloves and sugar leans cheerfully in the corner. You're just someone at dinner. And for the first time tonight you chew, but for a brief, glorious moment you're not a guest. You take the pie. "In here," he says, grinning, "we eat the riddles." And in here, you ask. "You know, he says they'll sit another 2 hours, won't touch a thing. It's all riddles and roses in there." You nod, sipping the stew. The steward from the feast walks by, licking his fingers. "Oh, they're still staring at the peacock, aren't they?" He chuckles. "Feast's back here," he says, as if explaining a weather report. Proper one, I mean. You are handed a bowl of thick stew. No ceremony, no folded napkin lion, just stew, and it's good. Not beautiful, not haunting, just warm and full and real. And everyone is eating. Loudly, joyfully, utensils clink, wine sloshes, someone sings, someone laughs with a mouth full of bread. You are in a narrow corridor that smells of bread crusts and smoke. The walls are stone and they breathe out heat. Somewhere nearby, something sizzles. The servants' hall, and then you see it. He leads you down a twisting path of wooden beams, smoky staircases, and sudden warmth. It smells like butter. It smells like meat. It smells finely like food. You nod. That seems like a safe lie. A young servant carrying a platter of eels nearly bumps into you and yelps. "Oh," he says, "didn't see you. You must be one of the new watchers." And immediately the air changes. You slip through. You notice the one who brought your chestnut box is watching from the corner. She doesn't smile. She simply nods once, then vanishes through a side door, one you hadn't noticed before. The door is carved into the wainscoting, nearly invisible and half the size of a normal one. You rise quietly. No one stops you. In fact, no one seems to notice. It's as though you've become a ghost in the gallery. And here's your odd detail. In some royal courts, the most elaborately dressed dishes were quietly swapped out for identical but edible versions once the ceremonial display had concluded. These were known as illusion courses, beautiful for show, humble for taste. Back in the hall, the note in your hand seems to warm slightly. Maybe it's the candlelight, maybe it's your imagination. But suddenly the servants don't look quite so invisible anymore. Sometimes the dishes meant for display, the pies with doves, the swans with glass eyes, the candied petals, were not as inedible as they appeared. They were theatrical, yes, but also technically consumable. It's just that the audience wasn't always the same as the diners. But there's more. This brings us to our common historical fact. In the late medieval period, noble households often had multiple layers of dining, each with different rules, customs, and levels of access. The upper table feasted with its eyes. The lower hall often feasted for real. This isn't entirely fiction. Historically, servants in noble courts often ate the real food and frequently had their own mini banquet after the guests left. In fact, the tradition was formalized in some households. After the Lord's meal, the remaining dishes would be brought to the lower hall for a feast among the kitchen workers, stewards, and scribes. You look up and everything feels slightly more fragile than before. It says the real feast begins where the servants gather. But not for the chestnut. A handwritten message no bigger than a fig leaf. Nearby, two noblemen are having a silent argument. It's not about territory or honor or jousting. No, it's about the placement of a sugared almond. One thinks it should be closer to the pear harp. The other insists it's meant to be off-center, a comment on existential longing. Neither raises their voice. But you're hungry, and yet the moment you lift it, a note flutters out. No, you reach for the folded linen lion napkin. It's harmless. A napkin is not a meal, it's just cloth. You begin to understand this feast is not a meal, it's a gallery. And in a gallery, the worst thing you can do is touch the art. And so you do what any curious guest would do. You reach. Not starving, not desperate, just that creeping, real hunger that reminds you that under the velvet and the pageantry and the swan-shaped steam, you are still a body. You look down again at your untouched plate. The pear harp, the little wax flower, the chestnut box. It's beautiful, it's maddening. It's the equivalent of dusting a still life painting. The violets weren't eaten because they're not food, they're mood. Servants appear with silver trays and long-handled tools, not to serve anything, mind you, but to polish the untouched dishes in full view of the guests. You watch as a platter of crystallized violets is gently buffed with a cloth of silk. No one flinches. A hush falls as a servant approaches with a small silver bell on a cushion. He bows, places it before the king, and backs away. The king lifts the bell and rings it once, ting. The hall shifts around you. You notice it now like a stage set changing without anyone pulling curtains. The lighting dims just slightly as chandeliers are lowered and replaced with fresh beeswax candles, their scent mixing with the warm spice of the untouched swan. You've passed some sort of invisible test. Or maybe you've just been invited into a deeper layer of the banquet, one you didn't realize existed. Either way, the box stays unopened. Not even the chestnut dares make a sound. You can smell cloves, cinnamon, maybe lavender. The swan is mounted on a mirror surrounded by candied nuts arranged in perfect geometric spirals. A velvet placard nearby reads simply, "Swanus aromaticus, do not touch." The chestnut box remains beside your plate, quietly radiating meaning. No one says a word about it, not the Duchess fanning herself with a pheasant feather, not the steward rearranging sugar roses with surgical precision, and certainly not the nobleman beside you who hasn't blinked in 8 minutes. Instead, you nod solemnly, return it to the box, and close the lid. There is a soft exhale from the crowd. Or maybe you'll discover who's really hungry in this hall. Until then, admire your empty plate. It speaks volumes. You have passed the test. Tomorrow, perhaps you'll learn why. You don't eat it. Around you, others pretend not to notice. You feel 100 curious eyes trying not to look directly at you. You lift the box. The chestnut glistens. You've been chosen, perhaps by accident, perhaps not. There's a guest near the corner table, an older man in a velvet tunic with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He's been here before. He doesn't look at the food. He watches who looks at the food. You wonder if he's cataloging who blushes at the molded butter sculptures, who hesitates before sipping rose vinegar, who dares to whisper, "Do you think that swan's real?" You are beginning to realize that nothing in this feast is meant for you. That is not you as a body, only as an observer, a participant in ritual, a curated eye. A servant glides up beside you. You brace for scolding. But instead, she places a tiny wooden box next to your plate. Inside is a single candied chestnut, still warm. It's time for the second course. The doors at the far end of the hall creak open, and in rolls an enormous cart covered in white linen and decorated with streamers of sugared orange peel. Atop it, a roasted swan wing spread in glowing gold in the candlelight. Back in the hall, something is happening. Now your open historical question. Were these excessive rules simply a way to maintain order? Or were they an elite method of gatekeeping culture? Was etiquette meant to protect dignity or disguise deeper power games? Here's your common historical fact. In noble courts of the 14th and 15th centuries, banquet etiquette manuals were widely circulated. These texts weren't just for the kitchen, they were for the soul. Think of them as a cross between Martha Stewart, a life coach, and someone deeply afraid of soup slurping. And your quirky historical tidbit. In some courts, there were official mouth wipers. These were servants specifically trained to offer scented napkins between courses. Their role was highly respected, especially if the king had a sensitive palate or just a lot of things to wipe. The idea was that every action you performed at a banquet reflected your morality, education, and social rank. Picking up a chicken leg with your fingers might imply you had Viking ancestors and were far too civilized for that. Unless it's served on a Viking-themed Thursday, of course. Then it's part of the theme. Do not eat with your mouth full. Of course, that's a trick tip because no one is eating anyway. Do not clean your teeth at the table with a knife, even if it's ornamental. In fact, there's a guide, an actual medieval guide to how you, a respectable noble, should behave at a feast. It's called the Book of Courtesy, and it gives you handy tips like, do not scratch yourself with both hands at once, just one hand like a lady. Still, despite the surrealism, everything here serves a purpose, a coded one. This isn't food service, this is performance ritual. Think of it like liturgy with more goose fat and fewer hymns. You glance down at your own place setting. There's a napkin folded into the shape of a sleeping lion, its paws tucked under its mane, crafted with precise linen pleats. Beside it, a rose petal folded in half, filled with a dab of perfumed vinegar. You're meant to wave it gently under your nose between courses, an olfactory palate cleanser. One man has a spoon with tiny holes in it like a tea strainer. It's called a spoon for sipping vapors. And no, he is not being ironic. In the world of medieval noble dining, how you behaved at the table was nearly as important as what was served. Actually, scratch that, it was far more important. Taking a bite at the wrong time could mark you as uncultured. Using the wrong utensil might offend your host. Picking up the wrong goblet, you may as well renounce your inheritance. Every guest seems to have brought their own interpretation of what eating without eating means. One noblewoman stares lovingly at a candied orange slice for 15 minutes and then, oh no, places it gently into her embroidered pouch. A snack for later. A relic. A secret gift. Because tonight you're not here to eat, you're here to witness the etiquette Olympics. You notice the Duchess across from you delicately dabbing the corner of her mouth despite not having eaten a thing. She's holding a spoon made of hammered silver, not to scoop soup, but to gently inhale the scent from her own wine. Yes, that's a thing. The moment the sneeze echoes through the hall, a ripple of half-lifted forks and gently raised eyebrows courses down the table. It's like watching a flock of birds almost take flight, but not quite. You wait, and sure enough, the court musician begins to play again, plucking out a gentle, almost bashful tune. The moment passes. The food remains untouched. The pear harp on your plate gleams in the candlelight. You place your hands politely in your lap and continue to observe. Well, that's the question for tomorrow night, isn't it? Probably not. Now that you've experienced this majestic, motionless meal, you might be wondering, why would anyone go through all this trouble just to not eat? Stay tuned. Maybe. It's not real, she explains. At least not officially. It doesn't show up on... You look down at your plate. A single sugared pear carved into a tiny harp. It might play music if you bite it just right, or it might collapse into paste. You smile. Now back in the hall, a hush falls. The king finally speaks, not to dine, but to commend the chef on the poetic symmetry of the fig and almond spiral. He even rhymes. But here's your quirky detail. There was an actual manual written for presenting food beautifully, Le Ménagier de Paris, a 14th century household guide. It included instructions for carving apples into lilies and carving roast birds without destroying their mystical essence. Apparently, spiritual trauma to poultry was a real concern. And now your open scholarly question. Was this food theater purely elite indulgence or a coded system of political signaling only understood by the educated few? Was a roast heron shaped like a dragon a dish or a declaration? Historically speaking, here's your common fact. In late medieval Europe, banquets, especially in noble and royal circles, were about status and staging. Chronicles from the Burgundian court describe entremets, which were elaborate dishes presented between courses for entertainment rather than consumption. Some involved animatronic devices powered by pulleys or hidden servants. A few sang. At least one reportedly breathed fire. Don't ask what they used to fuel that. And you realize this is performance art, food as theater. Flavor is not required. The main dish is announced. A wild boar glazed in honey teeth adorned with gold leaf eyes replaced with sapphires. It's paraded down the center aisle on a mirrored platform. Everyone gasps. No one raises a fork. You notice that each place setting includes a knife with a hollow hilt. Not for murder, don't worry, but to hold a dab of perfume. You're supposed to sniff it between courses to cleanse the mind, not the palate. But this particular banquet you're attending, it's taking the concept further. The entire hall is arranged like an edible painting. No dish is meant to be eaten. They will later behind the scenes by people who matter less, or perhaps more. In many medieval courts, especially in France and Burgundy, royal banquets weren't so much about nourishment as they were about displaying wealth, power, and imagination. Food was sculpted, painted, perfumed, and arranged as a symbol, not a meal. A common dish, for example, might include marzipan sculpted into swans, floating on actual water in silver basins. Fish were sometimes cooked, then reassembled to look alive again. There are records of live birds flying out of pies. Not recommended if you're seated directly across. This is a banquet of appearances. It's not a fasting day. It's not poison, probably. It's not a protest. It's something far stranger, decorum. The Duke of Nowhere in particular points to a tray of quince tarts with reverence. A bishop nearby whispers the name of a dish as if it were the answer to a riddle. One child reaches for a candied mushroom, but her governess bats her hand away. No one has taken a bite. You sit down and look around. The king, a portly fellow with rings on every finger and possibly one toe, smiles and lifts his goblet, but drinks nothing. The queen dabs her lips with a napkin embroidered with silver thread, though her lips haven't touched a thing. A single sip of rose water sits untouched in every guest's crystal goblet. Why? Instead, everyone is admiring. And yet, not a single knife clinks against a plate. You are standing just outside the great feasting hall of a 14th century European court. Let's say Burgundy because the name already tastes delicious. The stained glass windows are aglow with torchlight from the inside, making the scenes of saints look just a little tipsy. A musician tunes a lute beside you, nodding politely. There are over 300 guests inside, but oddly no one seems in a rush. Before you settle in, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy the content here. And if you're up for it, let me know where you're listening from and what time your local moonrise is. Hey friends, tonight let's explore a royal banquet that was, well, more for show than for chewing. You step into the heart of a candlelit hall lined with rich velvet drapes and tapestries woven with gold thread. The air is thick with clove rosewater and just a hint of something mysterious, something roasted perhaps, but definitely not eaten. You wake to the sound of soft clattering wooden bowls being stacked. Spoons dropped lazily into buckets of water and the hum of a lullaby someone hums without noticing. It's still dark, but not the dramatic darkness of night. This is kitchen dark. Ashy flickering alive with the fading warmth of embers. You don't remember falling asleep. Perhaps it was the cider. Perhaps it was the custard that tasted like a lullaby. Or maybe it was just the exhaustion of watching too many courses float past your nose without ever being meant for your mouth. You stretch on the bench, yawn quietly, and feel the chestnut box still there, pressed against your side like a stubborn thought. And then you remember the crumbs. They're still there, not in a random trail like a clumsy accident, but in a gently curved path across the dusty flagstones, neat, deliberate, faintly shimmering under the low light. Breadcrumbs that look more like clues than waste. So naturally you follow. The path winds behind the kitchen hearth, through a narrow archway and into a forgotten passage. It smells like dried herbs and baked apples, though neither is in sight. Cobwebs cling to corners, but the floor is clean. Too clean, really. Someone has been using this hallway. The breadcrumbs lead to a wooden door carved with images of grapes and vines, and oddly a squirrel holding a spoon. You pause, knock once. Silence. You knock again. Then the door creaks open, not by your hand, and you step into what can only be described as a memory dressed like a pantry. It's warm, quiet, cozy in a way that noble rooms never are. There are no guards, no rules, just shelves lined with baskets, clay jars, bundles of dried roots, sacks of flour tied with ribbon. And in the center, a table, small, round, and set for two. On it sits a candle, a teapot, and a tiny dish with 2 warm sugared chestnuts. The girl from last night is already seated. She gestures to the empty chair. You made it. You nod. Was I expected? She shrugs. Doesn't matter, you're here. You sit. She slides the sugared chestnut toward you. Not the one from the box. This is just dessert. You smile, but you don't eat it yet. You have questions. She tells you the name of this place, the Pantry of Forgotten Courses. It's not real, she explains. At least not officially. It doesn't show up on maps or inventories. But it's where dishes go when they're too clever, too humble, or too peculiar for the royal table. You look around. Jars are labeled in looping, whimsical handwriting: rose vinegar for sad days flour from the first loaf time collected by moonlight. You pick up a book resting near the teapot. It's titled Meals That Never Made It. Inside are sketches of food that sound like riddles. Gooseberries wrapped in nettle leaves to be eaten in silence after grief. Salted cream served in a cracked bowl reminding us of generosity. A soup with 1 carrot and a single word whispered into it before boiling. You blink. Did anyone ever eat these? She shrugs. Some, but mostly they were dreamed, not served. This, she tells you, is the secret third layer of the feast. The noble hall shows power. The salvage table shows joy. But the pantry holds the stories. The recipes written in margins. The ones passed in whispers. The ones never quite accepted upstairs, but never quite discarded downstairs. Recipes that meant something even if they weren't practical, beautiful, or easy to explain. This is where food becomes memory, she says, and meaning, even if no one eats it. Now here's your common historical fact. In medieval Europe, not all recipes were meant to be cooked. Many manuscripts included symbolic dishes written almost as poetry or prayer. Some were allegorical, meant to teach virtues through imaginary flavors. Others were coded messages recorded not for taste but for memory. A good example, a 14th century culinary manuscript from France, includes a dish called la soupe de l'oubli, the soup of forgetting. It had no ingredients listed. Just instructions to serve it after sorrow, but before regret. Whether it was ever served, we don't know. Your quirky detail. Some monks, particularly in apothecary scriptoria, used recipes as mnemonics. They wrote ingredients as metaphors. Basil for courage, cinnamon for warmth of speech. A dish wasn't just food. It was a message you could carry in your body. A language of edible metaphors. Which leads to your open scholarly question. Were these symbolic recipes truly ever cooked, or were they a kind of private literature, personal rituals in disguise? You sip the tea she offers. It tastes like pear skins and something herbal you can't name. It makes your shoulders soften. Then she pushes the wooden chestnut box back toward you. This, she says, is one of those recipes. You raise an eyebrow. She continues, the chestnut in that box is soaked in clove oil. Inside is a candied almond wrapped in a strip of handwritten paper. A recipe. A very old one. One that's never been cooked. You open the box. Inside, the chestnut glows faintly, sticky with glaze, fragrant with spice. You break it open carefully, and sure enough, within the soft shell is a tiny scroll no larger than your thumb. You unfurl it gently. The paper is old, the ink faded, but the writing is clear. To be made for one who remembers hunger not of the body, but of the spirit. Serve in silence, eat with the left hand, and do not look away. No list of ingredients, no steps, just that. You look up, she's watching you kindly, quietly. What do I do with it, you ask? She shrugs. That's up to you. Some people carry it for years. Others burn it and make soup from the ashes. You blink, people burn it. Sure, she says. Sometimes it makes a very good broth. The candle flickers low. She begins stacking empty cups, folding linens, moving slowly. You realize your time in this pantry is coming to an end. The chestnut box is now lighter in your hand. Its secret has been revealed but not resolved. You stand. She doesn't stop you. At the door you pause. What's your name? She smiles. It changes. And what's this place really for? She tilts her head. You'll know next time you're hungry. You step back into the corridor. The door closes behind you without a sound. Back in the servants' hall, the salvage table has been cleared. The fire is out. Everyone has gone to bed or returned to work. You sit alone on the bench chestnut box beside you, scroll tucked safely in your sleeve. And though you've eaten more tonight than anyone upstairs, you feel hungry again. Not for food, for the recipe. For the kind of meal that doesn't fill your belly but fills your sense of why stories matter. Tomorrow the banquet will begin again. There will be swans and towers and plates no one dares disturb. But you'll know something now. There is always more than one feast. And somewhere in the folds of flower laughter and forgotten courses you've found your seat. The next morning, or what passes for morning in the windowless belly of a stone fortress, you wake to the sound of boots, soft ones. Slippers, maybe. Cloth-bound, padded, quiet as a cat boots. The kind of footsteps that belong to someone who's allowed to go anywhere, not because of rank, but because of routine. The cook from last night, the one with the spoon tattoo on her wrist and a knack for comedic pastries, walks past you carrying a bundle of carrots. She sees you, smiles. You're still here. You nod groggily, apparently. Hungry again. Always. She laughs. We call that the kitchen condition. You sit up and stretch the wooden bench, now creaking like it too had a long night. The chestnut box is still beside you, lighter now, but still not empty, not really. Inside is the scroll, the silent recipe. The mystery you've tasted but haven't yet understood. There's a bowl of porridge waiting for you on the counter, still steaming. It's plain, barely sweetened, with just a drizzle of something golden that might be honey or maybe syrup from stewed parsnips if they're feeling mischievous. You eat it slowly, because now you're no longer just a guest in someone else's feast. You're part of the kitchen's rhythm. This morning there's no salvage table, no spectacle, no quiet conspiracies. Just breakfast. A humble word, one that rarely appears in noble banquets. It doesn't sparkle, it doesn't sing, but it does arrive on time without fanfare and with a sense of quiet importance. The cooks are already back at work, preparing for another day of not feeding the nobility. Trays of sugar are being sifted, fat is being rendered. Dough is rising in neat cloth-covered bowls that look like napping cats, and yet something's different. You notice a tall woman in a pale blue tunic carrying a bundle of dry herbs and a tiny scroll, not a recipe, a list, a map. She tucks it into a leather pouch hanging from a belt full of kitchen tools. She nods at you as she passes, and then she vanishes down a narrow staircase you hadn't seen before. You follow quietly, because of course you do. The staircase leads to a cold room, not a cellar exactly, but a kind of stone chamber with thick walls. A trickle of icy water along the edge and shelves filled with covered pots, pickled things, and bundles of wax-sealed packages. And standing beside one of those shelves is the taster. Yes, him, the man with the quiet voice and the unnerving calm. The one who walked through the servants' hall last night and left everyone just a little more upright in their chairs. He doesn't seem surprised to see you. Porridge, okay, he asks. You blink, very. He nods. Good. The morning batch is usually the safest. He gestures to the shelves. This is where we keep the food that's not quite poison but not quite welcome either. He says this as if it's perfectly normal. As if every castle has a category of uncertain edibility. These are ingredients that were meant to be used, he continues, but the flavor was too strong, the color too odd, the history too complicated. You look closer. There's a jar labeled Red Salt of the Silent Valley. Another simply reads Spiced Apple Peeled During an Eclipse. A bottle is sealed with wax and a note only for dreams, not for guests. And you understand this is the pantry of maybe. The ingredients that are too poetic, too personal, or too cursed to make it onto the noble table or even the salvage one. Here's your common historical fact. Medieval pantries, especially in noble households, were more than just food storage. They were often arranged by ritual rank and risk. Certain ingredients were reserved for religious feasts, some for seasonal rituals, and others only used when a specific guest visited. Even who could access what shelf was a matter of etiquette and hierarchy, and your quirky side detail. In one recorded case, a noblewoman refused to eat a dish made with saffron because it had been harvested during a thunderstorm, an omen she claimed of yellow betrayal. The kitchen kept the saffron anyway, marked in wax with a broken sun symbol. It was only used again years later in a dish served to a visiting playwright who claimed it gave him dreams of flying sheep. And your open scholarly question, were some of these untouchable ingredients avoided for health religion? Or simply because their symbolism became too dense to digest? Back in the present, the taster opens a drawer and pulls out a small box. Inside are 3 tiny fruits, dried figs so dark they almost shimmer blue. These, he says, came from Cyprus or Sicily, or maybe a garden that doesn't exist anymore. Hard to say. He rolls one between his fingers. Too sweet for some, too holy for others, too stolen maybe for everyone. You nod slowly, so they just sit here. He looks at you, unless someone asks, is anyone going to? He smiles, you just did. He hands you one. You don't eat it, not yet. Instead, you follow him back upstairs to a narrow corridor with faded tapestries and an old wooden bench. He sits. You sit, and for a moment neither of you speaks. Then he says, do you know why the king rarely eats at his own banquets? You blink. Because of poison. He nods. Yes, but also because of stories. He explains the royal family believes that eating something also means accepting its story. And too many stories can weaken a ruler's sense of self. So he watches, tastes, filters the stories, not just for danger, but for meaning. Some dishes, he says softly, have too much grief, or joy, or memory. They'll cling to the king, make him remember too much, or feel too deeply. You look at the fig in your hand. It smells like honey and salt and something old. You think this one's safe? He shrugs. It's not my mouth. So you take a bite. It's chewy, sweet, sharp, and suddenly you're somewhere else. The kitchen vanishes. The corridor disappears. You're standing in a vineyard under a pale moon, barefoot on warm soil, holding a wooden bowl filled with grapes that smell like thunder. A voice beside you, soft crackling, says, do you remember how we used to eat with our hands and laugh before we swallowed? And then you blink and you're back. The taster is watching you, but not unkindly. Well, he asks. You can't describe it. You just nod. He smiles. Good. Some ingredients remember more than we do. You part ways in silence. Later, in the quiet of the pantry, you return to the chestnut box. It feels different now. Lighter, yes, but also ready. Maybe tomorrow you'll return it to the girl in the pantry of forgotten courses. Maybe you'll write your own recipe and tuck it inside. Something like bread for when you feel like a wall. Butter for when you don't. You're not sure yet. But you know one thing. You'll never look at a banquet the same way again. Because you've tasted the food that remembers. And memory, it turns out, is the richest spice of all. The next morning, or what passes for morning in the windowless belly of a stone fortress, you wake to the sound of boots. Soft ones. Slippers, maybe. Cloth-bound, padded, quiet as a cat boots. The kind of footsteps that belong to someone who's allowed to go anywhere, not because of rank, but because of routine. The cook from last night, the one with the spoon tattoo on her wrist and a knack for comedic pastries, walks past you carrying a bundle of carrots. She sees you, smiles. You're still here. You nod groggily, apparently. Hungry again. Always. She laughs. We call that the kitchen condition. You sit up and stretch the wooden bench, now creaking like it too had a long night. The chestnut box is still beside you, lighter now, but still not empty, not really. Inside is the scroll, the silent recipe, the mystery you've tasted but haven't yet understood. There's a bowl of porridge waiting for you on the counter, still steaming. It's plain, barely sweetened, with just a drizzle of something golden that might be honey or maybe syrup from stewed parsnips if they're feeling mischievous. You eat it slowly, because now you're no longer just a guest in someone else's feast. You're part of the kitchen's rhythm. This morning there's no salvage table, no spectacle, no quiet conspiracies, just breakfast. A humble word, one that rarely appears in noble banquets. It doesn't sparkle, it doesn't sing, but it does arrive on time, without fanfare and with a sense of quiet importance. The cooks are already back at work, preparing for another day of not feeding the nobility. Trays of sugar are being sifted, fat is being rendered. Dough is rising in neat cloth-covered bowls that look like napping cats. And yet something's different. You notice a tall woman in a pale blue tunic carrying a bundle of dry herbs and a tiny scroll, not a recipe. A List A map. She tucks it into a leather pouch hanging from a belt full of kitchen tools. She nods at you as she passes, and then she vanishes down a narrow staircase you hadn't seen before. You follow quietly, because of course you do. The staircase leads to a cold room, not a cellar exactly, but a kind of stone chamber with thick walls. A trickle of icy water along the edge and shelves filled with covered pots. Pickled things in bundles of wax-sealed packages. And standing beside one of those shelves is the taster. Yes, him, the man with the quiet voice and the unnerving calm. The one who walked through the servants' hall last night and left everyone just a little more upright in their chairs. He doesn't seem surprised to see you. Porridge, okay, he asks. You blink, very. He nods. Good, the morning batch is usually the safest. He gestures to the shelves. This is where we keep the food that's not quite poison, but not quite welcome either. He says this as if it's perfectly normal, as if every castle has a category of uncertain edibility. These are ingredients that were meant to be used, he continues. But the flavor was too strong, the color too odd, the history too complicated. You look closer. There's a jar labeled Red Salt of the Silent Valley. Another simply reads Spiced Apple Peeled During an Eclipse. A bottle is sealed with wax and a note only for dreams, not for guests. And you understand this is the pantry of maybe. The ingredients that are too poetic, too personal, or too cursed to make it onto the noble table or even the salvage one. Here's your common historical fact. Medieval pantries, especially in noble households, were more than just food storage. They were often arranged by ritual rank and risk. Certain ingredients were reserved for religious feasts, some for seasonal rituals, and others only used when a specific guest visited. Even who could access what shelf was a matter of etiquette and hierarchy, and your quirky side detail. In one recorded case, a noblewoman refused to eat a dish made with saffron because it had been harvested during a thunderstorm, an omen she claimed of yellow betrayal. The kitchen kept the saffron anyway, marked in wax with a broken sun symbol. It was only used again years later in a dish served to a visiting playwright who claimed it gave him dreams of flying sheep. And your open scholarly question, were some of these untouchable ingredients avoided for health, religion, or simply because their symbolism became too dense to digest? Back in the present, the taster opens a drawer and pulls out a small box. Inside are 3 tiny fruits, dried figs so dark they almost shimmer blue. These, he says, came from Cyprus, or Sicily, or maybe a garden that doesn't exist anymore. Hard to say. He rolls one between his fingers. Too sweet for some, too holy for others, too stolen maybe for everyone. You nod slowly, so they just sit here. He looks at you, unless someone asks. Is anyone going to? He smiles. You just did. He hands you one. You don't eat it, not yet. Instead, you follow him back upstairs to a narrow corridor with faded tapestries and an old wooden bench. He sits. You sit, and for a moment neither of you speaks. Then he says, "Do you know why the king rarely eats at his own banquets?" You blink, "Because of poison." He nods, "Yes, but also because of stories." He explains the royal family believes that eating something also means accepting its story. And too many stories can weaken a ruler's sense of self. So he watches, tastes, filters the stories, not just for danger, but for meaning. Some dishes, he says softly, have too much grief, or joy, or memory. They'll cling to the king, make him remember too much, or feel too deeply. You look at the fig in your hand. It smells like honey and salt and something old. You think this one's safe? He shrugs, "It's not my mouth." So you take a bite. It's chewy, sweet, sharp, and suddenly you're somewhere else. The kitchen vanishes. The corridor disappears. You're standing in a vineyard under a pale moon, barefoot on warm soil, holding a wooden bowl filled with grapes that smell like thunder. A voice beside you, soft crackling, says, "Do you remember how we used to eat with our hands and laugh before we swallowed?" And then you blink and you're back. The taster is watching you, but not unkindly. "Well," he asks. You can't describe it, you just nod. He smiles. "Good. Some ingredients remember more than we do." You part ways in silence. Later, in the quiet of the pantry, you return to the chestnut box. It feels different now. Lighter, yes, but also ready. Maybe tomorrow you'll return it to the girl in the pantry of forgotten courses. Maybe you'll write your own recipe and tuck it inside. Something like bread for when you feel like a wall. Butter for when you don't. You're not sure yet. But you know one thing. You'll never look at a banquet the same way again. Because you've tasted the food that remembers. And memory, it turns out, is the richest spice of all. You wake again, but this time it's with intention. You've stopped feeling like a guest in this castle's underbelly. You're not quite staff, not quite royalty, and not quite a ghost, but something in between. A kind of edible observer. You stretch pat the chestnut box still tucked beneath your tunic and remember the fig. Not just the flavor, but the place it took you to. The vineyard under moonlight. The bowl of grapes. The voice. Memory through food. It clings to you like honey on fingers. And now you have questions. Because if one dried fig can carry an entire dream, what else is hidden in this palace's pantry of forgotten senses? The kitchen this morning is humming, but quieter than usual. No shouting, no clanging of pans. Just the steady chop of knives and a few yawns. A pot of porridge bubbles on the hearth. But instead of reaching for it, you glance toward the far cupboard. The one near the back wall. The one you hadn't noticed until now. There's no lock, just a latch. And when you open it, the scent of herbs and ink hits you immediately. Inside are scrolls. Not cookbooks, not ledgers. Scrolls, each tied with ribbon gold. Green, red, and blue, and labeled with curious phrases. The meal that broke two hearts in one chair. Soup for reconciliation if served warm. Bread for speaking honestly even when it hurts. A stew to forget you ever loved him. This is no ordinary recipe collection. This is the emotional archive of the kitchen. You unroll the one labeled "The Meal for Two" that became one. It's written in faded brown ink with flour smudges along the edges. It begins. To be cooked slowly with interruptions. Ingredients may include apologies, shared laughter, and 2 peeled pears. One pear will always cook faster. That's just how it is. Serve together anyway. You pause. You don't know whether to laugh or cry. So you do a little of both? This might sound like fantasy, but in truth, medieval kitchens were full of coded meanings and symbolic rituals, especially around food and relationships. It was common, for instance, to prepare specific dishes to mark occasions of sorrow, reconciliation, or change. Not just feast days and weddings, but more intimate human moments. A dish of eggs cooked in almond milk might be made for someone recovering from heartbreak. A simple soup of leeks and barley was often served to travelers returning home after years abroad. This brings us to your common historical fact. Food in the Middle Ages wasn't just nourishment, it was language. People used ingredients, preparation methods, and even timing as a form of communication, especially in households that didn't allow open expression of emotion. And here's your quirky historical detail. There's a recorded instance from 1381 of a nobleman in Milan who proposed marriage not with a ring, but with a loaf of bread shaped like his family crest filled with cinnamon rose petals and a small iron key. The lady reportedly ate the entire loaf but didn't answer for 3 days. He considered this a promising sign. And your open scholarly question, were these symbolic recipes genuinely understood by others in their time, or were they deeply personal codes, more like edible diaries than public messages? Back in the present, you roll up the scroll and return it carefully. You notice a new one being added to the collection by a baker with flour still on her eyelashes. She doesn't look up, just slides the scroll into the cupboard, whispering, "This one's for forgetting what he said." She leaves without explanation, and the cupboard closes with a soft click. Later that afternoon, you're invited, summoned by a cook with a crooked hat and a spoon that doubles as a walking stick. He taps it twice on the floor and says, "Time to learn the rules of silence food." You blink. The what? He turns on his heel. "Come." You follow. He leads you to a small side kitchen you hadn't noticed before. It's dark, no fire lit. A single window lets in gray light. In the center, a long table already set. No utensils, no cups, no plates. Just bowls made of hollowed bread, each filled with a thick beige paste. The smell is subtle, milky nutty with a hint of sage. Around the table sit 6 people. They're not eating. They're waiting. The cook nods to you. "Sit." You sit. He whispers, "You are about to eat your first silent meal." You open your mouth to ask a question, but he places a gentle hand on your shoulder. No talking. And then, as if following some unseen signal, everyone begins to eat. At first you feel silly. There's no music, no chatter. Just the sound of chewing soft breaths, the gentle creak of a bench. But then, you notice things. The texture of the bread bowl, crispy around the edges, tender underneath. The layers of flavor in the paste, almond barley, something floral. The way your body leans slightly forward, more attentive than usual. And above all, the presence of the others. Not as performers, not as competitors for conversation, just as people, eating together, quietly. Later, when the bowls are empty and the last spoon is licked clean, the cook clears his throat and speaks for the first time. "Well," he says, "you did fine. Most people giggle or cough or ruin it." You raise your eyebrows. He smiles. Silence food isn't about the dish. It's about who you're willing to share it with without needing to explain anything. You nod slowly. He adds, "We make it for the grief days. The days after bad news, after funerals, after confessions, or sometimes just because someone needs to be fed without questions." This brings us to one of the lesser-known realities of medieval life. Not all meals were loud or festive. Some were deliberately quiet, not out of piety, but out of emotional necessity. In monastic life, silent meals were common, but even outside monasteries, it wasn't unusual for certain households to observe silent eating during morning penance or reflection. This gives us our next historical fact. Silence was a recognized part of culinary ritual, especially in moments of transition between life and death, war and peace, exile and homecoming. And your quirky detail. A small 15th century cookbook from York includes a note beside a plain porridge recipe for times when words would spoil it. And finally, your open question. Was the value of silence in these meals understood communally? Or was it an individual comfort that just happened to be shared? That evening, you find yourself back at the long bench in the kitchen hall. There's music now, soft fiddle, warm tambourine. Someone is telling a joke about a carrot that became a monk. The salvage table has reappeared, though tonight it leans heavily toward desserts. You hold the chestnut box in your lap, thumb brushing the grain of the wood. You haven't opened it again. You don't need to. It's part of your rhythm now. One of the young cooks hands you a slice of pie. "What kind?" you ask. She grins. The kind that doesn't care what kind it is. You laugh. It tastes like apples and an unsent letter. You don't ask questions tonight. You just eat. Because sometimes even in the kingdom of metaphor and memory, pie is just pie. And that too is a kind of magic. It starts with a lemon, Or something that looks like a lemon. It's handed to you on a cushion of moss by a small boy with an apron twice his size and a suspiciously smug expression. He says nothing, just bows deeply and points to a low table in the corner, half hidden behind sacks of flour and bundles of lavender. You hold the fruit, if it is a fruit, and feel its curious texture. It's too heavy for a lemon, too waxy, and it smells like a memory you haven't had yet. You follow the boy's gesture. There behind the sack sits an old man with a nose like a loaf of bread and hands stained purple. He's peeling grapes with surgical care and humming a tune that sounds like a lullaby trapped inside a sea shanty. He gestures for you to sit, and so begins your introduction to the most elusive category of all, the untastables. The old man doesn't speak for a long time. He finishes peeling 3 grapes and lines them up with reverence on a chipped plate. Only then does he say in a voice like crushed cinnamon, "You've eaten the stories. You've tasted the silences, but have you met the foods that are only almost real?" You blink. "The untastables." He nods solemnly. They're the dishes that never quite made it out of the dream. Too fragile, too confusing, too honest. They exist on the edge of taste, just shy of the tongue. He hands you a small roll tightly wrapped in green leaves and twine. This, he says, is a sorrow dumpling. You wait for an explanation. Unfinished dough, he continues. Stuffed with things people meant to say but never did. Needs to be steamed over regret. But we haven't had a proper batch of regret in months, so it just sits here. You open the leaf wrap gently. Inside is a pale, sticky fold of dough that smells faintly of garlic and old apologies. You don't eat it. It's not meant to be eaten. It's meant to be understood. He gestures to another item, a jar of what looks like jelly, but it's entirely matte. No shine. Inside, a note for remembering things that didn't happen. Next to it, a wedge of cheese molded into the shape of a question mark, wrapped in parchment, scribbled with what might be recipes, or might be poetry, or might be tax documents. No one is quite sure. Then there's the tea. Oh, the tea. He pours you a cup of something that smells like old letters and pine smoke. It's not warm, but not cold either. You sip it. Suddenly you remember the way your mother hummed while washing radishes. You never noticed she did that. Not until now. "That's the tea," the man says simply. You are now deep inside the pantry's third dimension, not just memory and metaphor, but intuitive food. The kind that resists logic. You've crossed over from cuisine into culinary folklore. And strangely, it all makes sense. Because just like lullabies or dreams or certain smells that knock the breath out of you for no clear reason, these foods speak a language older than instruction. They just are. Here's your common historical fact. Throughout the medieval and early modern periods, folk food beliefs shaped what was cooked, served, or avoided, often independent of science or doctrine. Some foods were said to carry emotional properties. It was believed, for instance, that onions caused arguments if sliced in the presence of in-laws, or that lentils should never be eaten before writing a love letter too heavy on the heart. And your quirky historical detail. A German recipe manuscript from the 15th century includes a remedy soup for bad dreams. Cabbage leaves boiled with sweet wine, then whispered to 3 times before serving. One note in the margin reads, "Do not eat alone, or it loses its power." Which brings us to your open scholarly question. Were these beliefs symbolic entertainment? Or did they reflect a genuine emotional literacy, one expressed through food when language failed? Back at the table, the old man leans in and says, "You can't cook these with heat." You nod. You know what he means. These dishes require time, memory, and permission. Mostly permission. He hands you a folded paper blank, except for one sentence. "What dish would you make if no one ever had to eat it?" You sit with the question. You don't answer. Not yet. Because it feels sacred and slightly mischievous. Instead, you help him peel a few more grapes, which are later sprinkled into a salad meant to be tossed but not served. "This will rest in the cold room," he explains, "until someone dreams about it. Then we'll know it's ready." Yeah, you believe him. Later that evening, the cook with the spoon staff finds you again. "You met him, didn't you?" she asks. You nod. "He made me think about food that's not food." She chuckles. He does that. He said some meals aren't meant to be cooked or eaten. She grins. And yet they're the ones that feed us longest. You help in the kitchen that night, not as a guest. Not as a student, as something else. A keeper, maybe. A soft collector of recipes that don't belong on parchment but in the body's quieter corners. You carry tea to the steward with a voice like a violin string. You fold napkins for the baker who only speaks in half rhymes. You stir a pot of stew that will never be served but is being made just to warm the air. The chestnut box remains at your side. And finally you open it again, not to eat, not to read, but just to breathe in the scent of clove and old sugar. And you begin to write. Not a recipe. A memory. Your first untastable. It goes like this. It's steamed bread for when the sun sets early and your silence feels too loud. 1 cracked egg. 1 spoon of the last good honey. Stir clockwise. Sing nothing. Eat alone, but imagine someone else washing up after. You fold it. Tuck it inside, and the box feels just a little heavier again. Not burdensome, just full. That night, the kitchen breathes differently. It's not the usual hum of clanking pots and whispered recipes. There's no laughter rising from the salvage table, no flurry of flour-coated hands or songs about radishes. Instead, there's a quiet reverence in the air, as if everyone's holding their breath or waiting for someone to arrive. You find yourself drawn toward the pantry again. But this time, there's a candle already lit, flickering from within a deep alcove you haven't noticed before. The wax drips in perfect silence. Shadows dance on the stone walls, and beside it, resting on a wooden pedestal, is something that looks like a cake. Sort of, but not a cake anyone would ever serve. It's shaped like a closed book. The pages are layers of thin dough baked till crisp but not browned. The cover is a sheet of something glossy, maybe a reduction of wine and berries spread with the care of a monk illuminating a manuscript. And embossed on the surface in powdered sugar are 5 letters, Canto. You don't know what it means, not yet, but you're not alone. A few others have gathered here, silent, wide-eyed, respectful. No one speaks. No one dares. Then the old man from the Untastables appears carrying a small cracked teacup and a spoon too delicate to stir with. He looks at the cake size softly and says it's time. This is how you are introduced to the coded cakes. Recipes that aren't recipes. Cakes that aren't for taste. Desserts not meant to be devoured but read, and only by those who know how. He cuts the cake slowly, not into slices, but into symbols, a spiral, a crescent, a simple slash. Each piece is placed on a separate linen square, then carried off in different directions. One disappears down the corridor toward the royal kitchens. Another is passed to a monk waiting near the cellar door. A third is wrapped in wax cloth and tucked inside a hollow brick behind the pantry wall. You watch all this like someone watching a dream unfold. Not confused exactly, just aware that you've entered a tradition older than explanation. Finally, a small square is handed to you. It smells like time ink and the memory of someone whispering your name once in a storm. You hold it gently. It's not food. It's a message. Coded cakes aren't completely fictional. In several parts of Europe, especially in courts where literacy was limited and surveillance was high, food became a vehicle for secret communication. This brings us to your common historical fact. There is evidence that pastry crusts were used to deliver messages scratched into dough with a stylus before baking, then served to the intended recipient who knew how to decode them. These weren't always political. Sometimes they were romantic, sometimes warnings, and your delightfully odd detail. In 1462, a nun in a Spanish convent was caught passing theological notes hidden inside almond cakes to a monk she admired. The notes were described as flavored with regret and sweet sin, and your open scholarly question, were such coded confections widespread, or were they rare exceptions? Personal acts of quiet rebellion tucked inside public rituals. Back in the pantry, you sit on the floor and unwrap your piece. Underneath the dough layers, you find a slip of parchment, tiny, brittle, and dusted with what you think might be nutmeg. It reads, "Not every banquet feeds the body. Not every hunger wants bread. Tell no one, but keep cooking. You close your eyes. There's a pulse in your chest that isn't quite your heartbeat. Later that night, you return to the main kitchen. It's nearly empty, just a few embers glowing in the hearth. But there's something waiting for you on the salvage table. A plain shortbread cookie, round flat, no decoration. Except, stamped in the center is a single familiar word, listen. You smile. You don't eat it. You take it with you. You wander the castle halls, cookie in pocket, chestnut box underarm, and the scroll from the fig night still tucked against your ribs. You pass the grand feasting chamber, now empty. Long tables stripped of fruit towers and candied swans. Golden plates stacked high but unused. There's no one here now. No whispers, no laughter. Just dust, moonlight, and the faint smell of cold sugar. You sit at the high table, not because you've been invited, but because no one is here to stop you. You lay out your cookie, your box, your scroll. And you begin to write. Not with ink, with memory. You remember the soup that was never stirred. The porridge meant for silence. The pie made to resemble forgiveness. The fig that whispered thunder. And the cake that told you to listen. You begin writing a recipe in your mind. Take two people who once knew each other well. Add thyme, too much, then add tea. Do not speak. Let them slice bread at opposite ends of the table. Serve warm if possible, but cold works too. You don't know what it's called yet. But you know where it belongs. The chestnut box. You return it that night to the pantry of forgotten courses. The candle's already lit. The girl is waiting a slice of something uncut in her lap. You offer her the box without a word. She nods, opens it, reads your recipe silently, then tucks it inside, closes the lid, and says, "We've been waiting for that one." You blink. You knew it. She shakes her head, not the words, but the shape. She gestures to the slice in her lap. It looks like your recipe, and she takes a bite. No fanfare, no applause, but something in the pantry seems to exhale, as if a door just closed or opened somewhere far below. You sit with her a while, say nothing. The silence feels like company now, not absence. When you leave, she hands you a new note. It simply says, "Next the feast that was stolen," and you realize the banquet isn't over. It's just changing costumes again. Because every layer of this palace, the grand, the humble, the half-imagined, has its own appetite. And you've just learned to read the menu. The note stays folded in your pocket for most of the morning. You carry it like you carried the fig, the chestnut box, the coated cookie, not as luggage, but as language. A new word in a dialect of hunger you're still learning to speak. Next, the feast that was stolen. It's not a warning, not a headline, just a nudge, like someone tapping your shoulder in a dream. So you follow the nudging, through the main kitchen where batter is being poured into pans shaped like bells. Past the spice room where cinnamon is being weighed like treasure. Down into the root cellar where the air is damp and filled with the smell of sleeping vegetables. And finally through a door with no handle. It opens when you knock twice, pause, then knock once more. You're not sure why you did that. Your hands knew before your mind did. Inside is a room so ordinary it feels strange, wooden shelves, barrels of grain, a bucket of apples, and a long table set for a meal that clearly never happened. The plates are empty, the bread is cut, the stew is cold. The chairs are pulled out, but no one is sitting. It's a ghost of a meal, and you've arrived late, very late. A woman is sweeping in the corner, humming tunelessly. She looks up when you enter, but doesn't seem startled. "You're here for the stolen feast, then," she says, matter of fact. You nod. She nods back like you've passed a test with no study guide. "Sit," she says. You do. She ladles a small portion of cold barley stew into a clay bowl and sets it in front of you. Eat. You do. And with the first bite, the room changes. You're still in the room, but it's warmer now, louder. You hear chairs creak. Voices murmur, the scrape of spoons and the clink of mugs. The air smells sharper pepper mustard hot wine. You look around. You see people, a dozen, maybe more. Servants, bakers, pages, a boy with soot on his cheek, and a woman in a flower-streaked smock. They're all eating, laughing, talking. It's real. And then, in a blink, it's gone. Just you, your bowl, and the woman with the broom. You put down your spoon. What was that? The memory, she says, of a meal that happened once, but no one was allowed to remember it. So we kept it here, in the stew. This is how you learn about the feast that was stolen. Not stolen by bandits, not interrupted by war, no grand betrayal. Just forgotten on purpose, a feast shared between people who weren't meant to share anything at all. One that broke rules simply by existing. A baker gave food to a stable boy. A guard passed honey to a kitchen maid. A monk toasted a maid with spiced wine meant for a duke. It was small, it was ordinary, and it was forbidden. So it had to be erased. But food, you see, doesn't forget. Not really. And neither do kitchens. Here's your common historical fact. Throughout history, informal meals often happened beneath or around formal ones. While noble banquets took place in the great hall, parallel feasts among servants, apprentices, and others sprang up in back rooms, corridors, and gardens. These weren't always sanctioned. In fact, sharing food across social ranks could be grounds for punishment. But it happened. Because humans, when surrounded by food, eventually want to share it. And your quirky historical detail. A 14th century French abbey once documented a mysterious shortage of cheese. Investigation revealed that monks and stable boys had held midnight picnics in the wine cellar every fortnight, eating communion bread with stolen honey and singing secular songs. They left behind pressed flower patterns and a single wedge of goat cheese carved with the word "ours." And your open scholarly question: were these unofficial gatherings acts of rebellion or acts of community survival in rigid systems? Was eating together a way to defy power or to remember humanity? Back in the pantry, the woman stirs the stew again. She doesn't offer more, just smiles. It's not the kind of feast you eat twice, she says, but you can leave something behind. You understand now. She hands you a small strip of linen. You right. Bread shared between unequal hands becomes equal in the mouth. A sip of wine passed sideways means we're both thirsty. And if I hand you a pear, it's not charity, it's recognition. She folds it, slips it into a crack between the floorboards. That's how we keep the feast alive, she says, one spoon at a time. You return to the kitchen quieter than before. You pass the spice room again. Someone is sneezing into a bowl of cardamom. You pass the flower table. A boy is drawing shapes in the dust moon, stars a fish. You stop. He glances up. Do you want to see something? You nod. He uncovers a jar he's been hiding beneath a cloth. Inside, a jam made of plums and ink. What is it, you ask? Truth jam, he says. It only works if you don't ask permission to eat it. You grin. You don't eat it, but you remember it. Just like you remember the stolen feast. And the voices. And the way the barley stew tasted exactly like risk and kindness. That night at the salvage table, someone has made a pie with no filling, just crust. Not burned, not broken, just emptied. A note beside it says, "For the feast that wasn't supposed to happen. We left room for it anyway." You take a bite. It's the best crust you've ever had. And suddenly you know exactly what to place inside the chestnut box next. Not a recipe, not a secret, but an invitation. You write to be opened when you feel the hunger that doesn't mock your stomach growl. When you miss someone you've never met. When you feel like laughing but also like hiding under a table. Make barley stew, serve cold, share anyway. You fold the paper, and for the first time you feel the box fit it perfectly. Like it was always meant for this. Because some feasts are stolen, but some are quietly given back. One spoon at a time. Tonight the kitchen glows low and golden like a lantern half asleep. The rush of the day has ebbed, no more pounding mallets. No spiced steam escaping through cracked windows. No arguments over how long to soak the chickpeas. Just the hush of cooling pans and the slow breath of bread still rising in the dark. You sit at the long bench with a bowl of something simple, oats and milk stirred with a cinnamon stick that's done more listening in its life than speaking. No one tells you what to do. You eat because you're hungry. And that tonight feels like enough. Until she arrives. The girl from the pantry of forgotten courses. No apron, no scrolls. Just a small velvet pouch and a question in her eyes. She slides the pouch across the table. Inside is a coin, but not a coin anyone would spend. It's stamped with an image of a cracked egg. No inscription, no date, just the unmistakable symbol of something that was whole now, open now, capable of feeding. You look up, she nods. It's time for the egg stories. You blink, egg stories. She smiles. The ones that hold everything inside and still let something go. And so begins your night with the humble egg. Not the poached, perfumed kind served to nobles in golden cups. Not the deviled eggs of 20th century picnics or the soufflés of uptight pastry chefs. No, this is the medieval egg, the soft-spoken miracle, the quiet genius hiding in plain shells. She leads you into the egg room. Yes, of course there's an egg room. This castle has a room for almost everything. But this one is warm, slightly humid, a bit musty. Shelves of straw-lined baskets stretch to the ceiling, each holding eggs of various shapes, colors, and stories. Some are dyed, some are wrapped in cloth. A few have tiny notes tied around them with string. And in the center on a pedestal of wood and linen rests an egg with gold leaf pressed into its cracks. If she doesn't touch it, that's the first egg, she says reverently. Well, not the first, but the first anyone remembered. You raise an eyebrow. She continues. It was carried across 3 borders hidden in a woman's scarf. She never ate it, just kept it warm. When she finally cracked it, the yolk was still good. She made a tiny omelet and shared it with the guard who was supposed to arrest her. You stare at the egg. You believe every word. Here's your common historical fact. In medieval times, eggs were a culinary and symbolic cornerstone. They were used in cooking, medicine, magic, and metaphor. Beyond nourishment, eggs represented life, resurrection, transformation, and the boundary between the hidden and the revealed. In Lent, when meat and dairy were forbidden, eggs were also banned, making them even more precious when Easter arrived. Some were dyed red for celebration. Others were baked whole into breads or hidden in pies as a surprise. And your quirky historical detail. A 14th century cookbook from England includes a recipe for an invisible egg, a dish made by soaking an egg in vinegar until the shell dissolved, then suspending it in a jelly so the diner wouldn't realize they'd eaten anything at all. The marginal note reads, for guests who fear chickens. Or, and your open scholarly question, did the widespread use of eggs in symbolic cooking reflect practical abundance or a deeper need to express themes of fragility, trust, and transformation through food? She leads you deeper into the room. You pass a basket labeled eggs that were never cooked, only held. Another says eggs cracked too soon, still important. And then there's a shelf marked fast day eggs, made from almonds, flour, and imagination, she explains, for the days when even the idea of indulgence was forbidden. She hands you one. It looks like an egg, feels like one, but it's light as a whisper and smells faintly of rosewater and ground nuts. Monks used to make these, she says. They'd color them, decorate them, carry them in baskets, then break them and eat the illusion. You take a small bite. It crumbles like memory, sweet, soft, slightly oily, comforting in a way that says we know you want what you can't have. So here's the shadow of it. Eat gently. Later you find a basket labeled the argument egg. You lift it, it rattles. She grins, that one's filled with pepper and mustard seed. Given to feuding cooks. You throw it into the fire. If it pops, your anger gets cooked out. You laugh. I'm guessing it rarely worked? Oh no, she says. It worked perfectly, but sometimes it started new arguments. At a small table in the back, a boy sits carving designs into dyed eggshells with a needle. They're not for eating, he says without looking up. They're for remembering who made you breakfast when they didn't have to. He gives you one. You hold it carefully, blue with spirals and stars. The kind of gift that doesn't ask anything of you but patience. You return to the kitchen with a basket of these not quite eggs. The girl places one beside the chestnut box. They belong together, she says. Why? She shrugs. Because the chestnut hides something sweet, and the egg hides something sacred. You nod. That feels right. As the night deepens, someone begins frying real eggs on the flat stone hearth. The sizzle is a lullaby now. You're handed one on toasted bread. No truffles, no tricks. Just salt and the taste of enough. You sit on the floor with others. One girl eats her egg in complete silence, then sets the yolk-stained bread on the bench and leaves. No one stops her. A boy eats with his hands tearing toast like scrolls. Another presses his palm to his forehead after every bite as if remembering someone long gone. You eat yours slowly, and you think, the egg is the story that waited to be boiled, waited to be broken, waited to be understood. It could have stayed hidden, but instead it fed someone. You return to the pantry of forgotten courses that night and write one more slip for the chestnut box. Eat for the mornings when you don't know how to begin. Crack one egg. Whisper your fear into the shell. Cook it anyway. Eat until you remember you are real. You tuck it inside. And you don't look back, because some shells are better left broken. By now the castle's kitchen no longer feels like a place. It feels like a world. One where flour remembers who shaped it last, where vegetables roll toward people who need comfort, and where spoons don't just stir, they listen. You're no longer surprised when someone hands you an object without explanation. You don't flinch when a dish arrives with a note instead of a label. You've eaten memory, silence, apology, and things that weren't quite real but still tasted like truth. So when the head steward slides a heavy jar across the table and says, "Don't open it until you hear the bees," you don't even blink. You nod. And wait. You carry the jar with you throughout the morning, and it's not long before you begin to notice it a hum. Faint at first, but growing stronger as you move through the old stone halls. It's not in your ears exactly, it's in the air. Like a vibration tucked between heartbeats. A sound that smells like summer and aching sweetness. The hum leads you to a wooden stairwell you've never taken before. It creaks underfoot and opens into a sunlit room filled with dust, warmth, and jars. Hundreds of them. Amber light pours through the stained glass, catching in the golden syrup sealed within the glass. Honey. You've found the sweet cellar. A woman with honey-colored eyes and a dress patched with beeswax-stained linen sits cross-legged among the jars. She's stirring something in a copper pot, humming along with the hum. "You brought the jar," she says without turning. You nod. "He said not to open it until I heard the bees." She smiles. "You're listening better now." She gestures for you to sit. She uncorks the pot. Inside a dark, slow-dripping syrup the color of dusk. She lifts a spoon and lets the liquid fall, not like water, not like oil, but like memory made visible. "This," she says, "is midnight honey." And with that, your journey into the sweet codes of the Middle Ages begins. Not just sugar, though. Sugar has its stories. Not just confections, though. Pies and puddings have their rebellions. But honey. The old sweetness, the first sweetness, the sweetness that came before sweetness had a name. She begins by handing you a piece of honeycomb parchment, yes, parchment. Thin paper soaked in honey and dried until it crackled like sugar glass. On it a recipe. To preserve a kiss after parting, steep a clove in honey and tuck it beneath the tongue before sleep. In the dream, speak only one word. Wake with sweetness or silence. You blink. She shrugs. Some called it nonsense, others called it magic, but everyone called it food. Here's your common historical fact. In medieval Europe, honey was more than a sweetener. It was currency, medicine, preservation tool, and symbol. Used in baking mead sauces and even as an embalming fluid, honey was sacred to many households. Monasteries often kept bees not only for wax, but for their honey's incorruptible quality and your delightfully odd detail. In 13th century Wales, there's a record of a honey letter, a folded sweetbread soaked in wild honey and pressed with wax used to deliver a marriage proposal. The intended bride was expected to taste the bread and send back a second loaf spiced with rosemary if her answer was yes. And your open scholarly question, did honey's role in medieval life owe more to its practicality or to its symbolism as incorruptible, divine, and sensually elusive? Back in the sweet cellar, the woman uncorks the jar you were given. A rush of scent escapes floral fermented, something like apricots and something like old dreams. Inside is honey number 14. She doesn't tell you what it's made from. She just smears a dot onto your wrist. Don't eat it, she warns, just wear it. You do. The scent wraps around you like a cloak. People you pass for the next hour seem gentler. The cook who usually grunts nods instead. A page boy offers you a fig just because. Someone sings softly, warmly right in your direction. Later, she explains that one's from a hive that only visited elderflowers. Collected under a crescent moon, wears like a lullaby. You believe her. And then she shows you the sugar maps. Not made from actual sugar. They're about sugar. Small linen scrolls stained with caramel and ink sketched with the journey sugar took from India through the Islamic world into European kitchens. Each stop marked not with names but with dessert symbols. A diamond for spiced sweets from Baghdad. A spiral for candied almonds in Sicily. A star for a marzipan rose in a nun's hand in Provence. This, she says, tapping the map, is how sweetness became a story of power and theft and longing. Because here's the hard truth she doesn't sugarcoat. Honey may be homegrown, but sugar was often imported, controlled, and hoarded. It became a status symbol, a tool of excess, a display of wealth on noble tables. It sweetened dishes, yes, but also colonial ambitions. That's why many kitchens still preferred honey. It felt older, truer, less entangled with ships and chains. So while kings poured sugar over their meat and sculpted sugar castles in dining halls, the cooks here, they passed clover honey and clove bread between friends. She hands you a final gift, a honeystone. It's a tiny cube of beeswax and dried herbs meant to be dropped in hot water or tucked inside a pocket to sweeten dreams. You hold it. It's warm even though no fire touches it. You ask, how do I know what to do with it? She says when someone tastes bitterness, they didn't ask for drop it in. You nod. You'll know. That night in the kitchen, you add a spoonful of honey number 14 to a pot of barley stew meant for the steward who never smiles. He eats it, says nothing. But the next morning, he folds your apron for you and hums. You return to the pantry of forgotten courses and write your entry for the chestnut box. For the moments when kindness feels impossible, melt 1 spoon of old honey into tea. Stir until it forgets where it came from. Drink slowly, then give someone else the last sip. You fold the note, slide it into the box, and feel it settle. Like syrup over bruised fruit, you're scrubbing a pot the size of a small boat half out of habit half. Because no one told you not to when someone clears their throat behind you. You turn. It's the old man from the Untastables again, now wearing a green apron covered in soot and flour, holding something between tongs like it's slightly radioactive. He raises an eyebrow. It's time, he says, for the fried things. You blink. The what? He grins. The really fried things, the festival food, the carnival stuff. The sweet chaos on a stick. The dough that never had a plan but still showed up ready for joy. And just like that, you're whisked away into the crackling, sizzling, slightly unhinged world of medieval fried snacks. He leads you through a side door you've never noticed before because, of course, the fried things are kept separate. Too loud, too festive, too disobedient. You emerge into a narrow, open-air courtyard enclosed by stone walls but open to the night sky. Iron hooks hang overhead, cauldrons bubble, and smoke dances like gossip in every corner. A table is already covered in sheets of parchment soaked in oil stains. On each rests something golden puffed or twisted into improbable shapes. Welcome to the fry court. Someone hands you a stick skewering what looks like a miniature dough castle. You bite in. It shatters with a whisper, then collapses into hot air and honey with just enough salt to make your tongue sit up straighter. No one tells you its name, it probably doesn't have one. These are foods meant to disappear. Here's your common historical fact. In medieval Europe, fried foods were festival staples, especially during fairs, feast days, and pre-Lenten celebrations like Carnival. From fritters to donuts, chickpea cakes to crisples, people across classes enjoyed fried snacks that were easy to carry, fast to make, and often eaten hot on the street. Frying wasn't just for indulgence, it was a way to make use of leftover dough, stale grains, or odd bits of meat and vegetable. The result was often messy, joyful, and utterly unrepeatable, and your quirky historical detail. One 14th century manuscript contains a recipe for battered parsley, a dish made by dipping sprigs of fresh parsley into a thick, eggy batter and frying them until crisp. It was reportedly served with powdered sugar and considered both medicine and mischief. And your open scholarly question: were these chaotic fried foods simply practical indulgences, or were they forms of ephemeral art, culinary confetti thrown into the void, eaten before it cooled and never meant to last? In the courtyard, a woman with a long braid is frying ribbons of dough and folding them into swans. She burns half, laughs, dunks another. The swans don't always look like swans. Sometimes they look like dragons, or hats, or regrets. She doesn't care. It's the crunch that matters, she says. Someone else tosses spiced chickpea fritters into a bowl of vinegar and mint. They vanish as quickly as they arrive. And near the far corner, a child no taller than a butter churn is forming tiny balls of flour butter and honey, then dropping them into a skillet with all the focus of a scholar writing philosophy. You watch one pop rise and wobble in midair like it's deciding whether to be dessert or drama. You eat it. It tastes like secrets kept for fun. The old man hands you a scroll wrapped in fried dough. Not parchment inside the dough. The scroll is the dough. Each looped line is written in saffron batter crisped into the surface. You break off a piece and read: when the world is too sharp, eat something round. When the truth burns your tongue, coat it in syrup. When your heart is tired, fry it until it floats. You nod. You're getting the hang of this. They show you the frying games next. Not competitions, more like rituals disguised as chaos. The mystery crisp where you fry 2 ingredients chosen at random. Then guess what emotion they represent based on taste. The dough duel where 2 cooks face off by folding symbolic shapes into batter. One makes a horse, the other makes a teardrop. The judge eats both and says, "You both win, but I'm sadder now." The oil whisper, where you drop a single flower petal into hot oil and listen to the sound it makes. If it hisses, it's envy. If it sings, it's luck. If it screams, well, don't serve that one. You laugh so hard you drop your fritter. They cheer, because in the fry court, failure is a seasoning. And now, of course, comes your turn. They give you a bowl of soft dough and a pan already hot. You hesitate. Make something that makes no sense, someone says, so you do. You fold the dough like a question, pinch the edges like you're hiding something. Drop it into the oil and close your eyes. It sputters, sizzles, spins once. You retrieve it with tongs. Someone bites it before you can. They chew. Pause, then whisper, "Oh, that tastes like the moment right before a really good idea." You don't even ask how they know. You just grin, because that's the point of the fried things. They're not about meaning. They're about joy you didn't schedule. Here's a truth they whisper only when the oil is low and the night is full. Not all nourishment feeds your bones. Some feeds the part of you that dances in kitchen corners, that sings to pots, that throws dough in the air just to see what it becomes. Some feeds your mischief. And fried food, it's mischief that loves you back. As the fires die down, they hand you a paper cone. Inside the final fritter of the night, it's shaped like a crescent moon with a bite already missing. A note is folded into the bottom of the cone. That make these when your hands miss someone. Eat warm. Serve with no explanation. You fold the note. Place it gently into the chestnut box. And write your own. For the days when grief wears a funny hat. Fry something ridiculous. Eat with sticky fingers. Let joy drip down your chin. The chestnut box accepts it like a blessing, and you walk back inside the kitchen with the smell of oil in your hair and the sound of laughter still crackling in your chest. Somewhere behind you, another fritter explodes. Someone shouts, "Perfect." And you know this is the part of the feast that floats. The next morning begins with flour on the floor and a spoon in the ceiling. No one explains how it got there. No one questions the oddly crisp smell lingering in the air like donut ghosts and burned joy. You walk into the kitchen still grinning from last night. Your hair smells faintly of fryer smoke and cinnamon oil. The chestnut box is heavier now. The note you tucked in about frying grief has soaked in the scent of laughter. The lid feels warm to the touch. You press your palm against it just once, like saying goodnight to a fireplace. Then you hear it. A whisper, you ready for the quiet stuff. You turn. The steward is standing there, the one who never smiles, except now he is. "Come on," he says. He leads you out the side door. No fanfare, no breadcrumbs, no magical fig scent. Just a steady walk through a long corridor, down a curved staircase and into the monk's wing. You didn't even realize the castle had one. It smells like dust parchment and thyme tea. Quiet hums here like an instrument being tuned. You pass stone arches, worn benches, and long tables marked with faint knife scratches. Not from carving meat, but writing bread. Finally he stops. You're in the cloister kitchen. It's different here. No clanging pans, no hanging garlic, just stone wood and breath. The hearth glows faintly. Herbs hang in neat rows. The air feels steeped in ritual. This is where you learn about the monastic snacks. Not noble feasts, not festival fritters, but sacred secret food, made for stillness, made for listening to God or wind or your own regrets. A monk greets you with a nod. He wears a robe with burn marks at the hem, carries a ladle like a staff. He gestures to a bowl of something brown and crumbling. "A cheese bread," he whispers, "but with no cheese." You blink. He continues. "We made a vow of silence, and dairy was banned for the season, but Brother Eloy needed comfort, so we invented the suggestion of cheese." You take a bite. It's dry, bare, almost nothing, and then slowly, it becomes something. Warmth, salt, the memory of cheese without the weight of it. A whisper of dairy in the form of compassion. The monk just nods. Common historical fact. Monasteries in the Middle Ages had some of the most sophisticated kitchens in Europe, not from wealth but necessity. Monks observed strict fasts and dietary rules, especially during Lent. This led to creative substitutions: almond milk for cow's milk, ground fish bones shaped like dumplings, fruit stews designed to mimic meat. Quirky historical detail. Some monks made false eggs from almond paste and saffron placed inside real eggshells. As long as no one said they were eggs, they were considered legal. You sip tea made from fermented apple peels and lavender. It's gently sour, a little bitter, and deeply calming. The monk hands you a square of fruit leather folded like a prayer book. Maybe plum, maybe fig, no sugar, just sun and thyme. He murmurs, "Tastes better when eaten alone," so you find a quiet corner. He's right. It tastes like not being watched. Later, they show you the bread of vigil, dense, heavy as a confession, made with barley rye and old thoughts. It doesn't rise much, the monk says, but then again, neither do we. You grin. He doesn't, but his eyes say he almost did. Then comes the whisper cake, a simple oat cake, no glaze, no spice, just an indentation in the center. Before baking, you whisper something into that hollow. A fear, a name, a hope. You whisper, "I hope I never forget this." They bake it. You eat it. It crumbles quietly. You feel heard, even if it was just the oats. Open scholarly question. Were these substitutions acts of devotion, of survival, or quiet rebellion? Were they finding holiness through loopholes, flavor within restriction? As evening falls, the monks prepare the night tray. A tradition, a plate of leftover snacks, nuts, dried apples, crusts, boiled roots left on the windowsill. Not for people. For whatever needs it. A stray cat, a ghost, an idea not yet born. You help arrange it. And add one of your own fritters from last night. Still warm. Because mischief belongs with monks too. Before you leave, they whisper the real lesson. Food is not just for the body. It is a language, a discipline, a gentle hammer for shaping the soul. Even the smallest meal can be a mirror. You return to the castle kitchen in silence. No one asks where you've been, but they know. Someone hands you a cloth bundle. Inside a monk's spoon, flat, worn. A groove in the handle where thumb met thought for 20 years. You hold it. It holds you back. That night in the pantry of forgotten courses, you leave a new recipe in the chestnut box. for when words feel like too much simmer apple peel time in silence. Sip from a chipped cup. Let your thoughts steep beside you. If someone asks what you're drinking, smile and say, "A little time." You close the box gently. The wood creaks in agreement, and in your pocket the monk's spoon taps softly, like a bell rung for no one, and heard anyway. At one point, someone brings out the spinning tray, a round wooden board with small compartments filled with spiced fried bits. You spin it, close your eyes, and eat what it lands on. And maybe that's why it matters so much. Fried cheese curds dusted in mint sugar. They crackle, they splatter, they demand attention and then disappear in 3 bites. You eat it anyway. The cook hands you a bowl of fritter batter. Here's your common historical fact. Fried snacks were common at fairs, markets, and celebrations across medieval Europe. These included fritters, dough balls, sippets, fried bread pieces with herbs, and even small hand pies. Frying made food fast, hot, and festive. Though oil was expensive, communal fry pots were often used in villages for special events or holidays. Someone fries a handful of radish tops and declares it revolutionary. This is the chaotic, crispy, joyful world of medieval fair snacks. You are home. There are spiced pea fritters. Welcome, he grins, to the unofficial feast of no saints. This is not the folded food of pilgrims. A pot nearby explodes in bubbles. Today's story is about fried foods. Start with these, he says. They're called maybe turnips because maybe they are. We're not sure anymore. You swear it's size. Some are for holding on the way home. But because they are honest. This is not the silent food of monks. The door is wide open. You hear laughter off-key singing something sizzling in oil. They're tossed with salt, thyme, and a few crumbs of laughter. Fold it 3 times. In the center of it all stands a cook with cheeks like roasted apples, wielding 2 ladles like dueling swords. His apron is already smudged with fritter batter and pride. Just in case. You drift toward it. Past the pantry, past the vinegar jars. Down a corridor where dried garlic braids hang like sleeping bells. You round a corner and you're hit with the scent of cinnamon oil and fried leeks. You carry it. Tonight you don't follow a cook, for when your words get stuck behind your teeth. It's for those who've given everything away today, 'cause some snacks aren't for chewing. You step into the room and instantly step on something crunchy. A crisp crust, a burned pea. No one cares, everyone's too busy. You tuck it into your satchel. As you leave the bread room, someone hands you a folded turnover wrapped in cloth. You place it inside. You don't eat it. It's faint at first, barely there. A slow, wandering rhythm tapping out across the stone halls as if someone is drumming with wooden spoons on the edges of old pots. Not in the kitchens, not in the banquet hall, but somewhere between memory and festival. You look at the note pinned to the outside. You follow the music. Hand it to someone before they ask what's wrong. This one has no filling. Bake until golden. That evening in the pantry of forgotten courses, you find a note already tucked into the chestnut box. You haven't seen who placed it. No one laughs. Then write your own. The box shifts slightly. Seal it with a thumb. Fill a small bread with sweetness and spice. For the day you carry something you're not ready to name. You smile. A sealed bun with dried mushroom and pickled shallot nicknamed the excuse pie, traditionally given after arguments. Someone made one filled with air, and feel your own honesty rise in your chest like warm air. At the salvage table that night, the folded breads multiply. Someone made a braid filled with mashed beans and cloves. Wrap it in dough. It reads, offer it to someone who looks like they understand. Another shaped a triple fold and tucked inside pickled apple and mustard greens. Because we all know that hunger. Sometimes she says you can't say you're sorry with words. So you do it with yeast. Just wait. Here's your common historical fact. In the bread room, you're asked to shape your own. While it bakes, the baker shows you more folded foods. A half-moon filled with roasted beet and plum served to pilgrims who'd lost their way. You understand now that some flavors are apologies you can bite into. You take one bite. The filling peeks through like a secret too tender to fully hide, and your open scholarly question. Were these portable foods simply about efficiency, or were they personal edible gestures of emotion meant to travel further than the cook ever could? A few lentils because you always come back to them. You don't have to. It's for someone who needs space, they say. Folded breads, dumplings, and filled pastries were staples of medieval diets, especially for travelers, laborers, and pilgrims. These foods were practical, easy to carry, less likely to spoil, and capable of holding not just fillings but meaning. From meat pies to lentil turnovers, from folded flatbreads to stuffed barley pockets, folded snacks were food with intent. When your folded snack emerges from the oven, it's golden and slightly cracked. You choose a smear of mashed turnip for humility. You can fill it with anything the baker says, but it has to be true. You hold it gently, break it open. You nod. You stare at the dough in your hands. It's soft, slightly sticky. It smells like possibility. Not the royal displays, not the monastic rituals, but the food made to be carried, tucked, saved, hidden, or offered to someone walking the other direction. You fold the dough like a letter you're not brave enough to send. You press it shut with the edge of a wooden spoon. Inside is a mixture of pickled green sweet onion and a single raisin, a braided twist stuffed with herb paste and garlic left on stone windowsills for wandering monks. Today's story is about portable food, a pinch of salt for honesty, and your quirky historical detail. In 12th century England, a superstition claimed that if you folded a savory pie and sealed it with your own thumbprint, it would carry your mood to the eater. A sad cook made heavy crusts. A hopeful cook could lighten the heart of a knight. You finish your tea slowly like a ceremony, then follow your feet toward the far end of the east corridor. You've never been to the bread room. You didn't know there was a bread room. It tastes like a hesitation that almost became a poem. A sliver of pear for sweetness that surprises. No name. It's cold by now. And this is how you're introduced to the folded snacks. You don't ask what it's called, and on it sits a tray of folded breads. You take a bite. The next morning, a small note appears beneath your bowl of barley tea. You didn't see anyone place it there, and the ink is still damp, like it was written by someone in a hurry or by someone who wanted you to feel it more than read it. You return to your quarters with a piece of lentil bread wrapped in linen. There's always a room for whatever the kitchen needs to remember. But of course there is. They hand you one immediately. It's still warm, shaped like a spiral, and wrapped in a piece of paper that reads, it says, "And it tastes like patience." When you open the door, the smell hits you like a wave, yeast, heat, wood smoke, and longing. Add one dried fig for sweetness and confusion, and then fades. Some are pinched shut, others curled like question marks, others twisted into knots so tight you can barely see the filling. Blend with brine, lemon, and faith. Here's what you write that night in the chestnut box. On feast days we eat to celebrate, she says, but on fast days we eat to survive tenderly. And exhale. The room is low and warm, full of stone ovens that breathe like living things. Loaves line the walls in every stage of being raw, rising, resting, remembering. A few monks and cooks move quietly, shaping dough, flouring baskets, pressing thumbprints into round, humble mounds. It endures without shouting. Come to the bread room. Bring nothing but questions. You never learn why the bishop needs an egg full of nothing. But you eat it. Close the lid. Add a shaving of wax from the fake egg. At the center of the room is a long wooden table. Fish milk. And it feeds something in you beneath the usual hunger. For the days when you don't deserve sweetness, but you need it anyway. Make almond milk. Stir it with thyme. Pour into a cracked bowl. Drink until your quiet parts feel full. You fold the slip. This one is filled with something that wanted to be said at the time but wasn't. Like a memory of something you might have loved once but forgot too quickly. The cook sits beside you on a flour sack. It lingers. And not once do you hear the word substitute. Simmer white beans until they forget their beans. People think fast day food is punishment, she says. But it's actually gentleness. You tilt your head. Delicate. This food is like that. Chill under rosemary smoke. And then comes the most elusive dish of the fast kitchen. You sip it. You think of all the things that survive quietly, moss tea library corners, whispered prayers. Serve with silence. It's not actually milk, the cook explains. Something called cloud stew made from mashed white beans and a single crushed clove. Not anymore, she grins. The recipe is whispered like a spell, but it melts like forgiveness. Everyone nods. It's odd. You blink, or fish. Other dishes arrive, steamed barley dumplings filled with mashed turnips and dried pears. Inside, nothing but air. It simply exists without what it's told it needs. You're shown how to fold a mock egg, a paste of almond saffron and vinegar rolled and tucked into an emptied shell, then sealed with beeswax and humility. Someone cracks one. You stare, but something in you understands anyway. Fried onions wrapped in cabbage leaves tied with chive stems. The room pauses, 'cause here the food doesn't apologize. Perfect, someone whispers. It's ready for the bishop, only intended that way. You help with all of it, not butter. Serve in a dish that reflects sunlight without glass. Is pressed through cloth. The final product. You nod solemnly, unsure if St. Quiet is real, and your open scholarly question. Were these mock foods sincere devotional tools or clever loopholes for pleasure within penance? Chill under stones. Today's lesson, creativity under restriction, and your quirky historical detail. A 15th century recipe from northern Italy describes how to make a fish from almond paste and bread crust shaped like a trout and painted with berry juice. It was served cold with mint. The recipe ends with a line. If it fools your uncle, it is holy indeed. You don't ask. You don't want to break the spell. Not cheese. The cook hands you a bite. The recipe is as follows. Soak almonds overnight. Stir with a spoon someone once used to comfort a crying child. No, but cheese adjacent. Grind with water, salt, and a pinch of mustard. She explains we serve it with vinegar, roasted leeks, and lentil bread. It's for the fast of St. Quiet. You're assigned to the mock butter station. You watch as it's sliced firm, crumbly, lightly salted, flecked with marjoram. Back in the kitchen, the almond cheese is indeed ready. It's earthy, nutty, hints of lemon and memory. Here's your common historical fact. During medieval fast days, Lent, Advent Fridays, or particular saint days, Christians were expected to abstain from meat, dairy, and often eggs. This restriction gave rise to some of the most innovative recipes in medieval Europe: almond-based milk, wine-thickened sauces, and ground nuts shaped into mock foods like cheese butter or even fish. There are no meats here. No fats from beasts, no creamy sauces or gelatinous veal, just grains, fruits, herbs, roots, and invention. This is where you learn that lack is not absence. You're early, she says. That's good. The fake cheese is almost ready. She grins. You'll see. You blink. The what? A young cook greets you with hands stained purple and brown. It is invitation. And by now, when that feeling comes, you know exactly where to go. This is practical silence, the kind that simmers instead of chants. The entrance is easy to miss, just a narrow door beneath the vinegar shelves, marked only by a faint fish painted on the stone. Inside, it's quiet. It's about learning how things taste before they even reach the tongue. It's about the shape of a recipe, the feeling of a spice in your hand, the sound flour makes when it sighs against a wooden bowl. Not like the cloister kitchen where silence was sacred. It's not about tasting anymore. The kind that feels like curiosity wrapped in steam. The fast day kitchen. The next day begins before the sun. You wake with that kind of hunger, not because the castle demands it, though it always does, but because something has changed in your hunger. And that's enough, or not. Because some nights the best comfort food is food that doesn't ask to comfort you. It just waits. You return to your room carrying a simple bundle, a wafer, a piece of almond cheese, and a tiny flask of herb water. The box doesn't sigh this time, but you'll know they're there. You'll eat them tomorrow, for the days when joy feels too rich. Choose a food that listens. Let it pass through you like quiet rain. And remember, even lean things can leave you full. You press the cloth into the chestnut box beside your preserved cherry and folded lentil snack. That night in the pantry of forgotten courses, you find a thin square of almond jelly wrapped in cloth. But there's a note, almond broth with too much time. Tasted like a memory I hadn't earned. We'll try again. He nods. It's not a cookbook, not exactly. It's barely flavored, just texture and echo. You write your own entry. That's the spirit, he says. Fasting is not about denial. It's about seeing what you reach for when you think nothing's left. A honeyless dessert that reminded someone of childhood. You unpack jars of almond butter labeled, "For when desire knocks twice." You line up packets of dried peas marked, "For midwinter arguments with oneself." You brush dust off bundles of garlic shoots tied in strings shaped like prayers. Without eggs. A broth intended to be sad, which made a monk laugh. It's a ledger of fast day failures and inventions. A lentil cake that collapsed and became holy stew. It hums in your ribs for a while afterward. We call them quiet foods, he says. They teach the body to listen again. Without fear, their shelves are labeled not by ingredient but by absence. Each one is noted without judgment, just curiosity. A fish pie made with turnip and salt water that turned out better than the original. He hands you a book. Instead, he smiles. He invites you to the lean pantry hidden behind the chapel's apse. You didn't realize how loud flavor had been until now. You're not sure which shelf to choose. You nod. It's made from fish bones, spices, and herbs, but tastes like rainwater and memory, which makes it perfect for a day when food is allowed but joy is not. Without comfort, so you help him sort. It wiggles translucent, slightly shimmery. You taste it. It's warm, earthy, made with root vegetables, barley, and almond milk. A touch of mace, a suggestion of time. It's whisper thin, so thin it folds like a page. You bite, and you begin to understand this food isn't trying to impress. It's trying to hold you steady, your quirky historical detail. One recipe from a 15th century English manuscript offers instructions for mock eggs, a mixture of almond paste and saffron molded into egg shapes, with a bit of carrot dyed yellow to mimic yolk. They were served in real eggshells, a culinary illusion, or a quiet rebellion. Next, the rice and dill wafer. It's confusing. It's not soup. It's a soft-spoken poem you drink slowly. As you sit in the chapel, a monk appears quietly and begins adjusting candles. You think he'll tell you to leave. Without meat, it crumbles like real cheese, melts on your tongue. It's subtly nutty, slightly sour, and perfumed with, is that lovage? You taste the almond cheese first. Dry, yes, but it grows on you. You exhale. And finally, the strange jelly. Here's your common historical fact. In medieval Europe, religious fasting rules were complex. On many days, especially during Lent, meat, dairy, and eggs were forbidden. But people still found ways to create satisfying foods using almond milk oil grains and fish substitutes. Monasteries developed entire sub-recipes just for these lean days. Today, your story is about the snacks people ate when they weren't supposed to eat at all. Because even in centuries of devotion, fasting, and religious discipline, people still got hungry. And where hunger goes, creativity follows. You sip the broth next. You don't need to. Your open scholarly question. Were fast day recipes a sign of faith adapting to the body's needs, or a way to bend spiritual rules without technically breaking them? A folded wafer made from rice and dill. You dream of almonds. That night in the pantry of forgotten courses, the chestnut box is already open. For clarity, it tastes like paper that went to culinary school. So you go to the chapel. My fast day snacks for the stomach and also for the soul. You can't tell. You just know it fills a space without pretending to be something else. Inside is a slip of faded cloth with a preserved cherry sewn into the center. It's going to be a strange and quiet morning. They're for a morning that might arrive cold and wordless. You place them under your pillow, but a sign beside the food reads, not the dry modern ones you buy by the sack and forget in your pantry, but the golden, soft, mysterious kind you've only ever tasted in stories. In the dream, they bloom like snowflakes floating in warm milk, spelling out riddles you can't quite read. A bowl of warm, spiced broth thickened without animal fat. The tiny side chapel near the orchard wall is older than the rest of the manor. Its windows are small, dusty. Its floor is cold. But someone has left a narrow table by the altar, and on that table sit 4 small plates. But not for food. There is no one else here, not to pray but to snack silently. A wooden spoon resting beside a tray of something that looks like jelly but isn't. They're not for now. 7 years, she says. It was started the night a cook's lover left by sea. He preserved the lemons because he couldn't preserve the goodbye. Like tucking in someone you love who won't wake for hours. Hang it in the wind for eating beside a dying fire. A piece of almond cheese shaped like a candle. You pack small bags of honey figs labeled, "When you wake, you're already hungry." You return to your chamber with a pouch of sunbread and a tiny jar of lemon honey jam. You find one with a clove still stuck inside. It's accidentally perfect. Then remember it anyway. You close the box for sitting beside someone you can't help. For when everyone else is full and you are not. Gently, you learn to fold fruit leather around lavender sprigs. They're sweet, deep, slightly spicy. Wait until it forgets how fresh it once was. Because some dreams need snacks that waited for you. You add your own parchment for the moments that need more time. Slice the pear, and your open scholarly question were preserved snacks a form of nourishment, or a medieval expression of hope stored in edible form. We keep them, she says simply. Not every food is for eating, some is just for remembering we had enough once. You think you'll never look at citrus the same again. There's no note. You nod. It is sharp, bright, almost musical. You chew slowly. You ask if the labels are recipes or instructions. Just a faint scent of rose water and vinegar. Each nut has a date scratched into it. Some from last week, some from 15 years ago. The preservation room doesn't shout. You wrap dried apples in parchment with salt and rosemary. There's a jar of preserved lemons sliced thin and glowing like stained glass. You're allowed to taste one. Down the servants' stairs, through a corridor that echoes like memory, past a stack of cracked bowls that no one has the heart to throw away. You help sort a basket of dried plums, each one wrinkled into what looks like a monk in deep prayer. Your quirky historical detail. A 13th century Welsh tale tells of a young woman who kept a single dried apple slice in her pocket to remember the orchard that forgave her. It was never eaten, only touched on sad mornings. You help lay out trays of pear leather sticky ribbons rolled tight and tied with strips of old linen. They're labeled with things like, "For thinking clearly at dusk." Ah, she says, you're here for the ghosts. It doesn't sizzle or crackle. A woman in a long apron greets you with a nod. It tastes like quiet resolve and slightly sticky ambition. It's where time and hunger share tea and sigh about the seasons. You ask how long it's been in the jar, but it aches beautifully. Because not all hunger is urgent. For not crying while walking uphill. Here's your common historical fact. In the Middle Ages, food preservation wasn't just practical, it was essential. Fruits were dried into leathers or slices, vegetables were pickled. Honey was used to preserve figs, and root cellars were packed with apples and onions. These weren't just winter provisions. They were snacks of memory carried on journeys sent with loved ones, saved for fast days or used in trade. The woman hands you a slice of sunbread, a thin, chewy round made of pressed apricots, almonds, and a whisper of cinnamon. Some is for a day far away. Inside is a single fried herb leaf, almost transparent, still warm. What do we do with these, you ask? Next, you're shown the dried chestnut shelf. Neither, she says, they're intentions. For giving up the right amount, maybe joy doesn't always have to wait. You wake to the smell of apples. But the smell is permission enough. Your stomach doesn't growl, it listens. Today's journey is into the quiet world of preserved food. Specifically the snacks that survive not by being eaten fast, but by being meant to last. It's a traveler's food, she says. One bite is equal to an entire afternoon of pretending not to be tired. Some is slow. That night in the pantry of forgotten courses, the cook slips you a folded napkin. Or maybe you won't. You feel like you're eating history's bad ideas fried into greatness. You follow it, of course. I mean the snack, she adds, but let's be honest, it's both. You pause. It melts on your tongue like unfinished rhyme. No, this scent is older, deeper. Like someone folded thyme and smoke and honey into a wooden bowl, then walked past your door slowly just to tease you. You push open the door and enter the preservation room. By midnight, the oil is low and the air is thick. The last fritters are smaller, stranger, more philosophical. Not the fresh kind, those are for royalty and horses. You save it for morning. It's food that knows it won't last long, so it shows off. And a note, for the days when joy needs to be loud. Heat oil. Drop something absurd in it. Salt generously. Eat while laughing. And let the grease kiss your fingertips as a blessing. You press it into the chestnut box beside your other treasures. It's bizarre, it's divine. You leave the fair kitchen with a scarf that now smells like happiness and leaks. In your pocket, one last fried plum. It's delicious. It's dim-lined with wooden racks and woven baskets. Every surface whispers of waiting. Apples sliced and dried. Pears packed in hay. Fat rolls of fruit leather dark as dusk. Someone hums while brushing honey onto figs. You arrive at a room with no sign. A tiny square of fried garlic pudding. It rises fast. It crunches loudly. It gets eaten while still steaming. And vaguely rebellious, the box burps slightly in thanks. This is food as temporary celebration. It's the drama queen of the medieval pantry. Here's what no one tells you about fried food. Someone passes around fried poetry crumbs, tiny shavings of dough shaped into letters, then scrambled in a bowl. You get a piece shaped like a crooked R, and it leaves behind the smell of joy and napkins stained with legend. Food that doesn't last. And your open scholarly question was the rise of fried festival food driven by necessity celebration, or the human need to hear food crackle like a drum before biting it, and something you're pretty sure was once a plum than not a plum, then fried back into plumness again. He shrugs, whatever didn't behave. Apple slices dipped in honey batter, and that perhaps is their holiness, your quirky historical detail. In 14th century France, cooks sometimes made risselettes with chopped herbs, dried cherries and cheese, deep-fried in lard and sold by street vendors. They were considered mildly scandalous not for the ingredients but for how joyfully noisy they were to eat. You get a chunk of fennel root fried with lemon peel. What's in it, you ask? You ladle globs into hot oil. They sizzle, puff, and brown like miniature golden thunderclouds. The cook gives you a fried flatbread shaped like a crescent moon. It tastes like audacity. Another fries nothing and serves it with confidence. Not because they're grand, not because they're noble. There's no table. Food is handed around, bites are stolen, oil crackles. Someone burns their thumb and sings about it in rhyming Latin. You spread it on fast day bread and taste. It's a conversation. We don't break the rules, she says, we just bend them until they make music. It's rich. You sip and feel both confusion and comfort. You fall asleep thinking of all the recipes that were born from restriction, and all the saints who might have smuggled a little almond butter on the side. The note reads, when rules become walls, cook windows. When you are told no, ask what else is possible. A little sour, you tuck the shell gently into the box beside the other offerings, wafers, jelly, a preserved cherry, a square of sunbread. Just the contented sigh of a rule followed sideways. Rows and rows of them. Curious, you follow the sound down the corridor with the uneven floorboards past the herb garden door and into a low chamber filled with light. Food is not rebellion. You close the book with reverence, and here, sugar isn't just sweet. Back in your room, you nibble a bit of mock cheese and a wedge of fast day pie made of chestnut flour, dried apricots, and dreams. One recipe reads, it's strategic. The room smells like memory dipped in syrup. Your open scholarly question. Did these secretive confections reflect disobedience or a quiet theology of pleasure woven into survival? Here's your common historical fact. In medieval Europe, sugar was both rare and expensive. Initially used as a medicine, it was gradually incorporated into cooking, especially in elite households and monastic apothecaries. However, religious rules around fasting often discouraged indulgence, leading to a hidden culture of quiet sweets often crafted with almonds, honey, and exotic spices. You're handed a small jar wrapped in muslin. A young apprentice in a sugar-stained apron gestures for you to follow. She leads you to a low table where 4 objects rest. You sneak a snack and share it. You wake to the sound of soft clinking. The box hums. You've stumbled into the confectioner's alcove. You break it open. Not a loud sound. Not bells, not footsteps, something lighter like tiny spoons tapping glass jars. Because sometimes the holiest thing you can do, your quirky historical detail. A 14th century monastic record in Germany documents a honey book, a secret ledger of sweetmeats made during Lent for the comfort of the melancholic and the anxious. It was locked with string sealed in wax and kept inside a false drawer. The walls are lined with shelves, and the shelves are filled with jars. Because where there are rules, there are always secret cookies. Ooh, for when the soul forgets its own sweetness. A tiny biscuit shaped like a snail shell. Today's story is about forbidden medieval sweets. The hidden confections, whispered recipes, and the quietly theatrical world of sugarcraft that lived at the edges of fasting modesty and religious law. Their comfort spells. You take one. A cube of almond sugar wrapped in a bay leaf. Inside a cluster of preserved rose petals dusted with sugar resting on a folded note that reads, "A dried fig filled with clove cream. You want to live in its margins." It melts like a sigh. "These are not desserts," she says seriously. Later, she teaches you to make quiet cookies. You try the fig first. The clove hits your tongue like a bell in a cave, shaped with laughter only. A spoon carved from hardened honey. It's made of cedar, unlocked. You close your eyes. She offers you a small leather-bound book, smudged and worn. It tastes like secrets you weren't supposed to keep. You grind almonds, honey, rose, water, and breadcrumbs into a soft paste. You don't bake them. It contains no titles. Whip until light as chapel dust. Just sketches of cookies and vague directions like, "You love it." She shrugs. Fold with patience. Breathe twice before touching. You shape them into tiny birds, each one smaller than your thumb. You add your own. You leave them out to dry in the sun, covered with a silk cloth so they learn modesty. You place it gently into your satchel. Instead, he asked for the recipe. "For my sister who cried during winter and needed to remember spring." A friar joins you briefly and shares a story. Years ago during Lent, a novice baked a single sugar drop each day before morning prayers, hiding them beneath his robe. Another reads, "To taste joy on the 10th day without song. Eat it at dawn, or don't. Either way it keeps." The abbot didn't punish him. "Ut," one says, "For the night I remembered I am still allowed to want things." You ask if that's a joke. Yes and no. When questioned, he said they are not for pleasure. They are reminders of sweetness waiting on the other side of sacrifice. It's made with almond crust, quince paste, and a dusting of sugar and thyme. This is for no one, just because I could. And just before you leave, she says, you tie it with a sugar ribbon. It smells like defiance with good posture. The apprentice gives you a fasting tart to take with you. Inside are hundreds of little scrolls, each wrapped around a memory. She winks. That evening, back in the pantry of forgotten courses, the chestnut box greets you with a shimmer of gold. In the far corner sits a sugar box. Beneath it, a note. The moon is full. Someone has placed a single hard candy on a tiny velvet cloth. It's shaped like a teardrop. You just have to let it dissolve slowly. You fall asleep to the sound of clinking jars in your memory. For when the bitterness ends and you are surprised to find yourself still here. And your favorite, there's sweetness even in silence, you know. The grass hisses beneath your feet, dew brushing your ankles. You pass the old fountain, the bench with the cracked lion paw, and stop when you hear something unexpected. Because sweetness never truly disappears. Soft. Not by choice, there's no candle left in your chamber, and the fire in the east wing has long since guttered out. But it turns out that's fine. You don't eat it yet. Laughter. You just hold it in your palm for a moment and let it warm. And somewhere far away, a monk folds rose petals in honey and smiles. Soft, musical, definitely not authorized. Only it's not loud. Your common historical fact. Medieval cooks frequently fried food, often in lard or oil. From fritters and donuts to meat pies and stuffed vegetables, frying was a beloved, if slightly dangerous, method of cooking. It was popular at feasts in religious houses and during street festivals, especially when ovens were expensive or impractical. Your open scholarly question: did the rise of fried snacks reflect culinary innovation or a longing for indulgence within structures of restraint? Your quirky historical detail: a 14th century friar once wrote a complaint that the novices burned all the saffron fritters again, and now the floor glows like the sun and smells of shoes. No one was punished. Apparently, it was a good day. You follow it to a walled courtyard hidden behind the chapel, and there, under an awning strung with lanterns, you discover a medieval night fair, filled with mashed chestnut and pear laced with mint. It's just 6 monks and 1 cook sitting around a skillet frying something that smells absolutely forbidden. And yes, they made people very, very happy. You open it, it's not even public. Back in the courtyard, one monk waves you over. He offers you something hot wrapped in linen. Tonight you walk by moonlight, makes the entire orchard path silvered and sleepy. You bite and nearly forget to breathe. Another friar gestures to a tray beside the skillet. It just waits quietly. Tonight's story is about fried food in the Middle Ages, the festive, chaotic, and deeply comforting world of sizzling, spitting snacks. From fairs to convent kitchens, from street vendors to secret midnight meals, fried things had a way of showing up when rules let their guard down. It's crispy, warm, and so slightly sweet it feels like a secret. A fritter, still steaming. Frying food is like making peace with your past. Get too scared and it bites. Get too bold and it burns. But if you listen, just listen, it'll tell you exactly when to turn. You think he's talking about fritters. He says, herb-stuffed onion layers rolled in crumbs and flash-fried in olive oil. Each one hums. You try them all. About the time a nun in Provence created a festival of fried herbs, after dreaming that St. Catherine sent her a bouquet dipped in batter. You're not so sure. Fried chickpea patties golden and speckled with salt. Almond cakes dropped in hot lard and puffed into soft pillows. A monk named Brother Theo tells you the trick is timing and not flinching. A bowl of rose vinegar for dipping, because they're classy like that. Each one feels like celebration trapped in a crust. A sketch of a lopsided fritter labeled "Never Again." A story is told between bites. They look at each other and shrug. You help turn the next batch. About the 2 novices who tried to fry snow and ended up inventing a very wet pudding. "'Cause we missed each other," murmurs Brother Theo. Because it's Saturday," says one. "That last one hangs in the air like cinnamon. The oil is hot but not angry." That's entirely correct. A little girl in a patched cloak, she must be the gardener's niece, sits on a barrel nearby. She eats a fritter the size of her hand and says quietly, "I think warm food is the same as warm hugs, but from the inside." "'Cause the oil was already hot," says another, "and maybe that's what fried food does best." You ask why they're doing this frying food at midnight when rules say no noise, no indulgence, and absolutely no smiling. About the traveling cook who wore a leather apron that hissed whenever the oil was ready. You eat. At one point, the cook gives a toast. You listen, you laugh, even the oil bubbles in approval. You nod, a jar of candied fried sage. "We only fried the relic once. We're sorry, it was an accident, mostly." A small wooden plaque that says, "You tuck a folded fritter into your pocket." Crisp is just another word for fragile made fearless. You wonder why no one teaches history through fried narratives. As you drift into sleep, the scent of warm oil and sweet mint lingers in your breath. You leave the courtyard just before dawn, fingers smelling of sage and cinnamon. Eat it slowly. To the ones who share the last bite, to the oil that teaches patience. Then eat another onion ring. Remember. And to the snack that doesn't apologize. Later, you're shown a pantry drawer labeled Festival Sins. It contains, "You wake to a single bell, low, slow, and resonant. It doesn't sound like a call to prayer. Even cold, even alone, it holds its joy." Everyone cheers softly. He raises a battered ladle and says, "To the ones who come back for seconds." It feels oddly protective. No stew, no herbs, No warm bread wafting from the kitchen. Just air. This one waited for you. And somewhere in that dream, a friar winks at you over a skillet. You don't. Don't flinch, he says. No meat, no butter, no milk, no eggs, no oil. You bite. Back in your room, you open the chestnut box. Inside, someone has placed a single cold chickpea fritter wrapped in parchment. The note reads, "It still crackles." You rise, stretch beneath your wool blanket, and notice something immediately. There's no smell of food. But of course, this monastery has its own rules. It holds joy long enough for you to find it. It sounds like a call to pause. Here's your common historical fact. Medieval monasteries followed strict fast day regulations, sometimes over 150 days a year. Despite this, monks created creative snacks using allowed ingredients: almond milk, dried fruits, steamed grains, and root vegetables. These were made simply eaten quietly and often consumed in solitude. Your quirky historical detail. A 13th century Cistercian manual advises monks to chew dried apple slices at least 33 times for the age of Christ, and warns that swallowing too early betrays haste unbecoming of holiness. Your open scholarly question. Were these quiet snacks truly spiritual practice or a form of emotional survival wrapped in edible ritual? You dream of a festival where no one speaks but everyone eats with glowing eyes. And not just any fast day. Today is a fast day. Inside steamed millet, a sliver of dried plum, and a teaspoon of almond curd. This is one of the serious ones. Today we enter the world of monastic fast day snacks, the quiet, humble, often overlooked bites that monks crafted when all indulgence was banned. And yet the stomach still growled. Plain, cool, quiet, its own rhythms. You chew slowly. And its own small rebellions. Which can only mean one thing. He just hands you a pouch of fruit leather, thin, chewy strips of pear quince, and dried rose petals pressed into a paper-like sheet. And yes, you check twice, no sarcasm at breakfast either. In the refectory, you find a single bowl waiting for you. It comforts like a breath you didn't know you were holding. Brother Martin joins you. It feels like memory in edible form. Inside are baskets labeled Lent sausage mix, crushed nuts, onion, garlic, herbs, oil. Pretend you're not angry. Fry it until it apologizes. Another says, you nod respectfully. It's almond oil whipped with breadcrumbs and vinegar dyed yellow with saffron. Tall ones, short ones, some wrapped in cloth, others sealed with wax. Every jar holds something inside that glows faintly golden amber or ruby red, which honestly is a perfectly medieval experience. Inside, someone has placed a single mock egg. It's carefully balanced with a note tucked inside the shell. Each page is stained, smudged, slightly sarcastic. In the afternoon, you help stir a large pot of fake butter. The cook tells you about her favorite fast day trick, fish milk. And weirdly convincing, the cook grins. She shows you her recipe ledger. He carves the cheese into the shape of a lion and a saint playing chess. Fast day custard, almond milk, rice flour, rose water. Stir until you remember why you're doing this. Then you eat its tail. This is theology via souffle. That night in the pantry of forgotten courses, the chestnut box is already half open. It smells faintly of rosemary and something roasted. Is it good, you ask? It sounds disgusting. Not milk from a fish, obviously. But when you try it warm, sweetened with dates and nutmeg, it becomes something else entirely. The stew does not. It tastes like defiance dressed as compliance. He shrugs. It's better than guilt. Is that a hint of bacon? She shakes her head. Smoked eel skin. It's all legal. Your open scholarly question. Were these culinary creations spiritual compromises or expressions of faith channeled through creativity and hunger? But almond milk cooked with fish bones and herbs, then strained. A long table lined with trays of food that shouldn't exist today. You taste it and blink. There's a tray labeled eggs, not eggs. You follow it because of course you do. It's made from chickpeas, ground nuts, garlic, and herbs, wrapped in a thin bread skin and roasted until golden. Each one looks disturbingly realistic. You approach, and surprisingly cheesy. You take a bite of the mock sausage. Your body isn't hungry, not exactly. You sip from a small bowl of fast day stew. Here's your common historical fact. During medieval fast days, which could take up to half the calendar year, Christians abstained from meat, dairy, and sometimes even wine. But cooks, especially in wealthier households and monasteries, developed ingenious substitutes: almond milk instead of dairy, oil instead of butter, even ground fish bones made into cheese. Recipes grew more theatrical the stricter the rules became. The cook explains it contains turnip seaweed, almond oil, and mushrooms slow-cooked until thick. It simmers sternly, as if reminding you that theology and thermodynamics can in fact be friends. You want to be outraged. It jiggles. The cook standing behind the table nods solemnly at you. You take a bite and find almond paste, with a dollop of honeyed squash in the center, served inside a hollowed eggshell. You raise an eyebrow, your quirky historical detail. In 15th century France, a cook served the bishop a milk pudding made entirely of almonds and white fish fat, then dared to pipe it into the shape of a baby lamb. The bishop wept from joy, or horror. It remains unclear, because when the church said no butter, no eggs, no meat, well, the clever ones simply said define butter. Today's story is about how medieval cooks broke the rules, while technically following them. In the corner of the room sits a carving monk. He's shaping a wheel of cheese made from pressed rice and ground dried peas. She smirks. It's lean, not boring. Fried parsley leaves arranged like a wreath, and something labeled simply mock sausages. Do not panic. But it does. You tap one gently. You laugh. It's fast day food, she says. Toasty. Almond cheese that looks suspiciously melty. And there it is. Not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that feels intentional. A quiet that wraps around your thoughts like warm linen. The kind of silence that comes after fasting, after praying, after waiting for something you didn't know you were missing. Instead, you reach for a second. Fast day food with ambition. Down the narrow side corridor. Past the tapestry of a griffin and a sheep arguing over a turnip. Around a corner that creaks with secrets. It shouldn't taste this good. You step into your shoes worn soft at the heel and pad toward the courtyard, but halfway there something smells unusual. It's curious. You stretch slowly. You wake to silence. Warm. As you drift into sleep, you feel light. You taste it. You can't name the flavor. Not all abundance looks like feasts. And maybe that's the point. So that you remember. And this is nothing made into something, not because you lacked. And when you return to your chamber, the chestnut box is waiting. Tonight it holds a single cube. Some of it looks like quiet little lies made with love, like a kindness you forgot to expect. You too are not what the world thinks you are. You are more. But because the lack made space for play, invention, and care. But it lingers. You eat it slowly, on the plate in saffron ink. When offered with love, with gratitude. She got promoted, translucent, pale, wrapped in parchment that reads, even illusions can nourish. Too well, someone whispers, and beneath each picture is a note. You share almond wine with someone who confesses he once tried to turn carrots into duck legs. You hear rumors of an abbess who served mock oysters on her name day made from sculpted apple cores and fermented lemon. Brother Ambrose leads you to the hearth where something bubbles in a pot. Fully present, you ask if it worked. A sausage with no meat, just walnut paste and cinnamon packed into onion skin. It's not a place of silence, it's a place of culinary invisibility. You bite. Only mock foods are allowed. No real ingredients, no direct flavors. Then you steal the drawing of the fig pig and tuck it into your sleeve. Back in the kitchen, a young novice hands you a biscuit shaped like a tiny wheel of cheese. It's labeled, eat with grace, but don't let the illusion become your truth. Sometimes food must trick the mouth to save the soul. God sees what you mean, not what you chew. You stare at that last one for a while. But the joy, made of almond paste and dried pear, lightly steamed, glazed with something glossy. They look innocent, a wedge of cheese carved from honeycomb and pine dust. You listen to stories of monks who faked bacon with dried beets and beetroot juice only to confuse visiting bishops. That night you're gifted one final dish, a cold egg tart, really almond curd and date puree in a buckwheat shell topped with one tiny violet. Nutty herbal and deeply savory. You could baptize someone in this, you whisper. Fish milk, he says cheerfully. On a low bench sits a tray of mock butter cakes, small, square, pale gold. You sip a spoonful. Almost dairy, mostly hope. You eat it. You feel seen. Later in the scriptorium, you discover an entire illustrated book of false foods, a roast pig made of fig paste. You're then invited to the quiet table. They taste like rebellion at medium volume. Ambrose winks. Brother Ambrose beams. One should never underestimate monks with time and dietary restrictions. It's about almond cheese, invisible eggs, and yes, fish milk. It's shockingly good. You laugh. Labels read, "Not butter, almond oil whipped with vinegar and salt." You look alarmed. You're just in time for the yolk, not guilt a plate of raw carrots. Some have tried, he explains. You take dried fish. You steep it with breadcrumbs and crushed almonds. You strain it and season with parsley and lime. The result, a rich white broth that looks like milk, but isn't. Very popular during Lent. Some say it even has visions. Bite gently. Not chicken fried cabbage balls with a dramatic attitude. He hands it to you with reverence. You taste them all. Each is strange. Each is clever. Each is made with care that borders on mischievous holiness. Your open scholarly question. Did the creation of faux animal foods reflect culinary subversion, devotional playfulness, or an evolving theology of intent versus form? You do. He tilts the bowl to show a golden paste, saffron-dyed and seasoned with nutmeg carefully piped into a carved-out eggshell. You find Brother Ambrose in the kitchen garden whisking something pale in a clay bowl. It's smooth, creamy, lightly sweet, and absurdly convincing. Your quirky historical detail. A 15th century Benedictine kitchen text includes a recipe for a boiled egg made from almond milk curd dyed yellow and poured into eggshell halves for visual realism. Instructions include be careful to tilt the head of the eater lest the illusion break too soon. Not cheese-pressed bean curd and horseradish. You follow him into the kitchen where today's theme is apparent. It's a tale of mock food substitute feasts, culinary illusions, and the sacred art of cheating without sinning. You pull on your wool robe, still faintly scented of rosemary and smoke, and step into the hallway where dawn has barely begun. The windows are blue. The air is cool. The monastery is so quiet you can hear your own breathing crisp and rhythmic like a metronome set to contemplative. You've never been more ready. It's not noise that stirs you or hunger. Today is one of the creative ones. It's something else. Something like what happens when you can't have butter but you still want joy. Here's your common historical fact. During strict fast periods, medieval cooks were prohibited from using animal products, meat, eggs, dairy, but they didn't stop cooking. Instead, they developed elaborate substitutes using plant-based ingredients, especially nuts, grains, and legumes. These mock foods mimic the appearance and even the texture of banned ingredients. Today isn't just another fast day. Almond egg, he says without looking up. And the last thing you remember is the taste of apple skin paper dissolving slowly on your tongue. Our story tonight or this morning, depending on your state of sleep, is about what happens when monks and medieval cooks want something indulgent during a time they're not allowed to have it. You wake before the bell this time. And for the first time all day you feel full. You don't speak. And a note, not confused, a question maybe. Just a folded linen warm to the touch. As you lie down to sleep, your belly is light. Your breath is long, and maybe even sweeter. You dream of monks walking silently across gardens, pockets filled with sunbread and thoughts. There is no snack inside. You chew, but of something older. Not of food. And maybe, just maybe, you wake up a little more empty in the right places. Some things are shared by not sharing. Not everything holy must be held. It is about what grows in the space you usually fill. You sit with that. It thickens like fog. Just quiet. You stir it gently in a ceramic bowl. So sit quietly. On the windowsill, a note. And let the silence taste you back. Chew slowly. You sit, and when you finally open the chestnut box, something unusual happens. Inside it, nothing. Tonight is not about hunger, and when you finally eat it, you understand. He shows you how to make a fast-day pudding. No spice, no honey, just warmth. You find a small roll made of mashed lentils and herbs tied with a ribbon of leek. You place it on your tongue. This is food that doesn't interrupt. It waits for your thoughts to arrive and gives them space to sit beside you. Monastic candy, he says, offering you a pinch. He's grinding dried mint and fennel into powder, then cools. Brother Martin offers you a loaf of sun bread, then fades into nothing. It tingles. Almond milk, cooked rice, dried apple slices. It's earthy grounding and vaguely nutty. You feel refreshed but not entertained, which apparently is the monastic ideal. In the center of the room sits a basket labeled simply, "You Smile." It's a rotating list of anonymous monk observations about fast-day snacks. Later that day, you join Brother Martin near the herb wall. You read a few. Today's pear was shaped like St. Ambrose's hat. I chewed in awe. The fig was dry, but it made me remember spring. Steamed turnip, nothing else. But it reminded me to breathe slower. You realize this isn't about food. You take a bite and chew. You return to your chamber with a pouch of chewing roots, cooked parsnips, dried fennel stalk, and mint rind. It's both funny and reverent. Then you eat. The kind of food that doesn't ask you to love it, just to listen. But maybe those two things aren't so different. It's warm, soft, and entirely unexciting. It's about slowing down enough to feel the world inside you. It's heavy, dense. For the ones who didn't want to eat but did anyway. It's not scripture. Everything here seems crafted for presence, not pleasure. No yeast, no salt, just cracked barley, mashed figs, and thyme. On the wall hangs a scroll titled Notes from the Belly. Preserved pear skins, no additions. It doesn't comfort like a hug. He gestures for you to follow and leads you through the cloister garden, down 3 steps and into a low pantry lit only by filtered morning light. Almond paste, minimal joy. But somehow it's just what you need. Dried plum skins for thoughtful chewing only. Steamed roots silent. He doesn't speak. Quiet, faintly floral, a bit like parchment kissed by sunshine. Some paths are circles. That doesn't mean you're not moving. The note beside it reads, "Inside a wafer you didn't expect." It's shaped like a spiral, etched with tiny footprints. Back in your chamber, the chestnut box waits. You don't say much. No one does. You place it at the well's edge and whisper, "For the part of me that keeps going even slowly." Each bite feels like a soft nod from the past, like eating a quilt. It's not sweet in the modern sense, but it's kind. After the ceremony, you return to the refectory for remembrance cake, a layered confection made from leftover wafers. Dried fruit, almond paste, and rose water. The sound is oddly soothing, like twigs breaking in a forest you're not lost in. But as the wind picks up, a few wafers lift and tumble into the well, cracking gently. You smile. Of course, no one speaks. But in the sunlight, a faint shimmer appears, a snail. It's round, pale, blank. You unwrap your wafer. Your turn, then steps back. You walk slowly toward the orchard, where a shallow wafer well sits, more symbolic than functional. Each person places their wafer gently at the edge, says a name or a memory or nothing at all. We don't record the whole wafer, just the part that touched someone. He nods. At dusk, a procession forms. Each person carries a wafer wrapped in linen. Inside, a wafer shaped like a ladder with bite marks only halfway up. You press your thumb into the blank, leaving a small curve. "Leave your impression," he says. He hands you a small piece of wood with an empty space carved into it. A broken wafer glued back together with "oops" carved on the edge. Brother Petrus slides open a drawer marked "Lost but Loved." A square one etched with stars and a faint thumbprint in the center. It's made of wooden replicas, exact copies of wafers that were meaningful, carved into thin panels and stored in drawers like butterfly specimens. Later, you're taken to the wafer archive. It's not made of flour. How you chewed it slowly and somehow kept going. How it tasted like uncertainty and cinnamon. About the first wafer you bit into here. How it cracked like ice underfoot. You tell your story too. The flavor is faint, oat, smoke, a little salt. Another tells of a childhood memory eating street wafers shaped like animals and insisting that the lion tasted braver than the rabbit. Afterwards, each person offers their wafer story. One monk shares a tale about receiving a wafer from his brother the night before he left for pilgrimage. It had a tiny drawing of a hand reaching for a star. He kept it in his sleeve for 3 weeks before finally eating it in a thunderstorm. You remember a song you hummed 2 nights ago, a face you saw in a painting, the weight of the candle stub you held when you arrived. But it opened something. You close your eyes and bite. You lift it carefully. Unlock what you forgot it reads. In their place, a circle of chairs, each with a wafer resting on its seat. It's stamped with an image of a key. He smiles. You smile back. The wafer under you is warm from the sun. In remembrance, he says we eat slowly, without chewing too loud. Brother Linus gestures for you to sit. Some are marked, some are blank, some cracked, some whole. Down in the refectory, the usual long tables have been cleared. Your quirky historical detail. A 15th century will from a widow in Flanders requested that 12 poor women be given cinnamon wafers shaped like doves to eat slowly beside her grave while remembering the time she fell in a lake wearing all her jewelry. Your open scholarly question. Can food ever fully replace memory, or does it serve simply as a vessel meant to be broken to let the memory out? Not just food. Your common historical fact wafers were not only used for religious or celebratory purposes in the Middle Ages. In many monastic communities, they were offered as edible tokens of commemoration for anniversaries of births, deaths, saint days, or pilgrimages completed. They were sometimes handed out during funerary rites as a gesture of continuation. Life goes on, and so does bread. Because tonight you're entering the final layer of medieval snack ritual, the wafer as remembrance. But a memory you could hold, then eat. You step into the corridor and follow the scent of warm flour and old stories. Not just ritual. No name, no instruction, no explanation. When you open your door, there's a folded slip of parchment on the floor, a drawing, a circle of wheat around a single word. Remember. It's the kind of silence that feels like cloth being folded. Just stillness, soft and whole. No bells, no quiet clatter of pots being stacked. No footsteps. You wake to an absence, all sacred in their own quiet way. Some cracked. You fall asleep with the taste of rose sugar and baked patience on your tongue. Some whole. And in your dreams, the world unfolds not in miles, but in crunches. Each step taken, each thought tasted one soft wafer at a time. One with a compass rose. One with the phrase, not every path is visible until you chew it. You arrange them on your windowsill. Then stillness. The wind rattles the shutters once. Back in your room, the chestnut box awaits. Tonight it contains 3 wafers, 1 blank. You underline soft edge. Entries like Elric, wafer of second chances 2 times. Marta, wafer of silence 8 before speaking. Unrecorded pilgrim. Received 3 courage, dryness, and lemon. There's an empty line with your name penciled above it. You take that as a sign. In the library, you discover a wafer ledger, a record of who received which symbolic wafer and when. It cracks on the way down. You add Wanderer's wafer, bittersweet with a soft edge. Then one by one, the wafers are left in a basket beneath the bell, later to be crumbled into ritual animal feed for the monastery's goats, which Brother Linus insists makes their milk slightly prophetic. You leave yours. You each press a wafer against the old stone and whisper something you're ready to let go of. Afterwards, a small group of you head to the eastern wall where the wafer bell hangs. When held to the flame, they shimmer softly like tiny suns. One monk forgets and gets sticky eyebrows. Silently, you're told not to eat them until the last note of the hymn. Everyone forgives him. At the Vesper service, instead of candles, the monks each hold a glow wafer, translucent, made with sugar and almond oil designed to catch the flicker of light. It is here. You nod like that's a normal sentence. This one saved me from marrying a shepherd I didn't love. Some are faded. She's given a wafer cloak, a long linen scarf stitched with flat wafers along the edges. Each one has a date. She points to one from 4 years ago. Some cracked. Brother Cedric winks. Same thing if you do it right. Later, a visitor arrives. She's a barefoot woman with dust on her hem and a feather tied to her walking stick. You ask if this counts as generosity or just medieval composting. Not to throw away. To press into crumb cakes, a kind of recycled treat bound with honey and herbs, often given to travelers too poor to afford fresh food. You nod. That tracks. After lunch, you help gather wafer crumbs from the corners of the dining hall. The moral: don't be afraid to start over, especially with butter. You chew your way through a fable about a baker who burned his bread and was visited by a saint disguised as a goose. They're meant to be eaten in order, she explains, like a meal of moments. It rings like a distant footstep. This one says, "May your feet forget their pain before your heart does." You nod, then gently tap the wafer with your knuckle. He holds one up. Inside in the scullery, a novice is ironing story wafers. Crispy long wafers etched with tiny scenes: a fish swallowing a coin, a knight hugging a donkey, a goat trying on a crown. Some are wrapped in cloth, each with a handwritten blessing. It contains wafers of all shapes: round, square, oval, fish-shaped. Some are thick and pocked with caraway. Some are thin as parchment and dusted with rose sugar. On it, a pilgrim's basket. Your open scholarly question: were portable wafers considered quasi-sacred due to their shape and ritual associations? Or had they already blurred into folk medicine and magical thinking? You follow Brother Aldrich to the courtyard, where a small table has been set up beneath the mulberry tree. Your quirky historical detail. In 13th century Bavaria, a traveling wafer boy was fined for selling communion-style wafers in town squares with inscriptions like "Good luck in marriage" and "Fewer blisters, please." Yes, today is about the wandering wafers of the medieval world, humble little discs with holy ambitions. Your common historical fact. In medieval Europe, thin wafers oblati were not only used in religious rites, but also popular as portable, durable, semi-sweet snacks. Pilgrims often carried them for both nourishment and comfort. These wafers were sometimes stamped with symbol saints or prayers, making them function as edible tokens of protection or penance. Because today we're going to talk about the wafers that didn't just stay in the monastery or on the altar, but wandered. You blink sleep from your eyes and follow him without question. Carried in bags, sold on corners, shared by strangers, whispered over by pilgrims who believed in edible blessings. Gentle, hollow, wooden. Testing for resonance, he says. If it sounds hollow, it's ready to travel. He looks up. You open your door to find Brother Aldrich crouched on a stool in the hallway, gently knocking on a round, flat wafer with his knuckles, like someone drumming their fingers against a crust. It's a rhythmic tapping, and the soft sense that something small, something light, crisp, and thoughtful is always with you. Not bells, not bird song, not even chanting. You wake to the sound of something almost music. You wake full of quiet. Some simply melt before you can read them. Some bear your questions. You open the chestnut box. Tonight it holds only this A crumb. No label, no explanation. Just a soft little shard of something once whole. You place it on your tongue. It vanishes in a second. But the warmth lingers longer than expected. Some bear your thoughts, and in your dreams wafers rain gently from a pale sky. But the act of chewing feels like folding your thoughts into something flat and peaceful. It's from Petrus. Inside is a tiny pink wafer stamped with a snail holding a lantern. On the back, for the part of you that keeps going even slowly. You hold it a long time. You don't eat it, not yet. Wrapped in paper that says, "Eat when you wish to feel still," you do. At your door, a small envelope. The flavor is subtle, almost nothing. It's square, soft, speckled with fennel. Afterward, you follow Brother Elric to the scriptorium, where he reveals a hidden drawer. Inside, the book of broken wafers. One entry reads, "Snapped during sorrow. May the crumb remind me I'm still whole." Another laughed too hard. Cracked the corner, still ate it, still grateful. You add your own bit too fast. Missed the message. But the crunch was divine. It's a collection of poems, reflections, and doodles from monks who broke wafers in moments of clumsiness or emotion. You're handed a night wafer before bed. It's not a joke. You just chew. You don't answer aloud. What have you forgotten to let go of? Yours says, Later, you're invited to the evening crisping. It's a small, odd ceremony held only once a week when the monks gather in silence to reflect and nibble specially made wafers infused with lavender, thyme, and a touch of clove. Each wafer is marked with a different question. He bows, everyone claps politely. You're told not to eat those wafers unless you enjoy basil-flavored dirt. It's exactly what it sounds like. Brother Alwyn wins with a toss that glides over the herb wall and lands near the well. Who can throw their wafer the farthest without it cracking? And just like that, the snail is part of you. Out in the cloister garden, the youngest monks are playing a game called wafer toss. Petrus nods solemnly. Pilgrim energy. You eat it. He encourages, write a thought you don't need tomorrow. You draw a tiny snail carrying a tiny suitcase. This is the story of medieval travel cookies' humble companions tucked into satchels and souls wrapped in waxed linen carried across rivers over mountains and sometimes smuggled past bishops. You sit beside him and he hands you a blank one. You hesitate. At the long table, Brother Petrus is decorating wafers with edible ink. You know he says wafers are like scrolls you eat. Just enough room for one idea, then crunch gone. He flips the next one with ceremony. Steam rises. You ask about the iron. It's a hefty bronze hinge with carved designs on each side. It's whisper-thin and oddly peppery. Elric smiles. Sometimes food is just how we tell each other things without getting caught. Elric shrugs. Some symbols are theological, some are just monks being bored. Is that symbolic? This one has an angel holding a fish on one side and a goose wearing a crown on the other. You blink. You taste the third kind, gossip wafers. Extremely thin, lightly salted, and delivered between friends with ambiguous facial expressions. Honey wine wafers, served to guests and pilgrims, often flavored with herbs. Did the wafer's symbolic versatility snack sacrament signal make it one of the earliest forms of edible media? He shows you plain religious wafers, stamped with crosses, lilies, or lambs intended for ceremonial use. In the kitchen, Brother Elric greets you with flour-dusted eyebrows. Perfect timing, he says, flipping a wafer iron. We're making 3 kinds today. Your open scholarly question, your quirky historical detail. A 14th century manuscript describes a priest in Toulouse who baked over 600 custom wafers with saints' initials before a local festival. When asked why, he replied, "So the sinners can eat alphabetically." Here's your common historical fact. In the Middle Ages, wafers in French were popular across Europe. They were often made of flower water and sometimes honey or wine pressed in hot irons with elaborate religious or heraldic designs. Served during religious feasts at street fairs or as pilgrim offerings, they were as much about ritual as they were about taste. Yes, those delicate, crispy little cousins of bread that medieval people somehow made into sacred objects. Street snacks, marriage tokens, and very occasionally weapons of passive aggression. Down in the courtyard kitchen, someone is already at work pressing thin discs of batter into hot, patterned molds. You follow the scent of scorched wheat and warm spices through the cloister, your slippers soft on the stone. Today's chapter, wafers, that you tasted something no textbook could ever hold, and that you too are part of the feast now. That's the story for tonight. May your dreams be filled with wonder and peace. And as you breathe in this final quiet, if your mind drifts tonight, let it drift through abbey gardens and sugar-stamped wafers. Through the halls of kings who watched food perform and never lifted a fork. Through meals made not to be eaten but to be understood. Know that you were here. The comfort, the slowness, the strange and soothing warmth of a world where nothing rushed but everything meant something. You don't need to remember every date, every name, every curiously symbolic fish pie. You just need to remember how it felt. And here we are. Not at the end, because history never really ends, but at a pause. A soft comma shaped like a spoonful of warm honey. Whatever world you drift into now, sleep dreaming tomorrow, may it carry the quiet richness of all the stories hidden in bread. The ones no banquet guest ever spoke aloud. The ones that linger in corners and kitchens in crumbs. And now, it's time to let go. You've wandered through crumb-strewn cloisters, listened to monks hum over cheese, and watched wafers crack like secrets being gently told. You've eaten silence, shared sweet nothing, and followed trails made of flour and feeling. After all, there is no hurry, and you were always invited. The banquet was always waiting. You walk toward whatever comes next, as slowly as you need to, step by step. And the crunch by crunch, not with facts, but with flavors of feeling. And you full not with food, but with the memory of eating. Dawn rising like a new loaf, and you turn toward the door. Outside, the sky is wafer pale. Some are meant to be kept. You slip it into your sleeve. Some maps aren't meant to be consumed. You breathe in. You don't eat it. Maybe never. Not yet. You hold it in your hand. On the back a note, "You were here, now you go." Swirled lines, a few bumps, one tiny X in the middle. In its place, a new wafer sits on the pillow. You don't need them too. Shaped like a map. Back in your room, the chestnut box is gone. No footsteps echo. You know the way now. Just once, you walk from the hall. Soft, final, beginning. As if someone somewhere is blowing out the feast like a birthday cake made of silence. One by one, you stand and the candles go out in waves. Not urgently. Of course you do. It cracks like snow underfoot. Not loudly. Then you laugh. A bell rings, and for a moment you understand everything. Because you forget it instantly. You eat the second half. The goats, always the goats, and the abbey blooms around you. You close your eyes. The kitchens, the gardens, the cloisters, the laughter, the secrets passed in honeyed crumbs, the slow chewing of memories, the crackle of ideas shared in edible form. Like something watching you back. You eat one half. You break it. You sit. It feels alive. You hold the wafer. What you do next is your own banquet. No inscription. It holds one wafer, no decoration. You reach the head of the table. Not just a folded note beside it. There is a single plate. Plain, round, softly cracked. Like old parchment warmed by the sun. The smell of memory. And something else. The smell of honeyed dates. The warm scent of marzipan. The faint hint of rose. You walk the table, touching nothing but feeling everything. That's not what it's for. But you don't. A roasted peacock feathers, resplendent eyes made of tiny sapphires. You could eat it. You stare at it. At the center, a wafer throne constructed from hundreds of delicate rounds stacked and spiraled and dusted with shimmering powder. A fish sculpted from sugar swimming through a sea of clear jelly. Everything is almost food. A pile of gilded almonds lacquered to gleam like coins. You approach the table. Nothing here is quite edible. The dishes are arranged in precise lines, golden trenchers, silver goblets, crystal bowls filled with imagined fruit. No one stops you. Your open scholarly question. Were royal banquets a form of culinary theater designed to reinforce power through spectacle or a means of controlling appetite as a symbol of divine restraint? Your quirky historical detail. In a 14th century English banquet held for a visiting French delegation, over 300 dishes were served across 5 hours, including a roast swan wearing a cloak of its own feathers, and it's recorded that barely half of the food was actually consumed. Most guests pretended to nibble politely while side tables were secretly fed. Your common historical fact, royal banquets in the late Middle Ages were intricate affairs not just about food, but ceremony, status, and silence. Often the display of dishes was more important than their consumption. Food could be untouched, uneaten, purely performative. Some feasts were designed as visual spectacles where not eating was the message, and no one is sitting at it. Yes, that table. And there in the center of the vast stone floor is the table. You find your way almost by instinct to the great hall, a place they've never taken you until now. The royal banquet set, waiting, gleaming under candlelight, exactly as it was centuries ago. We're just reaching the part of the story where the page thins and the parchment turns transparent. We're not ending anything. The abbey feels a little less like a building and a little more like a memory that knows your name. But don't worry. You don't hear bells, you don't hear footsteps, but you feel movement. Tonight is your final night here. Something has shifted. The silence tonight is companionable. There's something soft in the way the light falls across the stone. Not golden, not silver. Just hollow light like the pale glow off the surface of a well. Tonight the air smells like flour and dusk. Further into peace, just the feeling of being gently remembered. And in your dreams you walk through a forest of wafers crunching underfoot. No prayers. Some are whole, some broken, but every step takes you further into quiet. No bells, no candles. You crawl into bed, each one more certain, each one deeper than the last. You eat it in 3 slow bites. It's a wafer iron. It takes you a moment to realize it's not thunder, not a door creaking open, not a choir. It's crisp, repetitive, almost musical. Snap, clack, crunch. You wake up with a strange sound in your ear. And in your dreams you walk a winding road. Not every journey is walked with feet. And in your hand always a cookie that knows the way home. The trees whisper in biscuit crumbs. The moon follows like a lantern. You eat it slowly, feeling your body anchor itself into your bed like a pilgrim setting down their pack for the first time in days. Lightly dusted with lavender, filled with fig paste. Inside a single cookie shaped like a tiny satchel. You break the seal. You break only when the path bends too far. For the road within you, it reads, inside a wax-sealed paper tied with a ribbon of linen. You open the chestnut box. You think maybe you'll save it for when you need direction. Or when the world feels too noisy and you need to remember that once you chewed through the dark and it became sweet. Back in your chamber, you place one remaining travel cookie on your pillow. Each swallow like a step towards somewhere unknown but safe. You chew slowly. Each bite feels like walking. Not an actual kiss, that would be against the rule. The sky is deep and blue-black pricked with old light. You step outside under the stars. When you bite it, you taste date clove and dried orange, but mostly you taste the feeling of being sent off by someone who wants you to come back. It's a small round cake, soft inside, crisp outside, shaped like a cross in motion. Just in case. Inside is a pilgrim's kiss. Before you leave the scriptorium, Brother Mateo slips you a folded cloth. You copy one down. Good when the sun sets behind you. For the mouth that forgets song. Each recipe ends with a line like, to be eaten when hope feels thin. Later in the scriptorium, you find a tiny folio titled Liber Peregrinorum Dulcis, the Sweet Book of Pilgrims. Joy biscuits for long roads, dried cherry rosehip and grain glue. Sleepless nuts, walnuts soaked in vinegar, plus thyme. It's filled with recipes meant to be carried, not consumed immediately. Toothkeeper cakes, honey, plus ash flour, plus wine reduction. You sip nettle tea. The wind howls, but you feel anchored. About the night, a group of pilgrims tried to roast preserved travel loaves in a monastery fireplace and triggered a 4-day ban on jokes. About the rogue baker who shaped travel biscuits like the tongues of saints and claimed they improved foreign language skills. Sturdy, faintly herbal, you're weirdly into it. About the nun who packed a cookie in every psalm of her prayer book. The two of you share stories, flat oval baked to fit beneath a pilgrim's heel. Tough, dry, but according to Mateo, shockingly effective against both hunger and twisted ankles. It's like biting a sandal made by angels. You try one. Yes, really? He holds up one item, last a shoe biscuit. Almond trail cakes wrapped in birch bark. Pilgrim's mark, he said when he handed it to you. Eat when lost. A folded paper of dried lemon peel, brittle and sharp smelling. Anise seed lozenges hard as pebbles. Honey wafers folded into quarters. Traveler's tray, he says. You peer in. There you find Brother Mateo oiling the hinges of a cartwheel. He nods toward a box beside him. You leave your chamber with the cookie still in hand and walk toward the old gatehouse. It's like chewing on memory, but as it softens, flavors emerge, caraway dried, fig a ghost of honey. It's tough. You bite, but now feels close enough. You haven't been lost yet. Back in your candlelit room, you unwrap a small linen pouch given to you by Brother Sylvanus earlier in the day. Your open scholarly question. Did the form and function of travel snacks blur the line between devotion and digestion, and can edible objects carry prayer? Inside is a hard, circular cookie flat, dense, slightly cracked on the surface, with a stamped image of a walking staff crossed with a fish. Your quirky historical detail. A 12th century pilgrim confessed in a margin note that he baked holy bread with the toe shape of Saint Anthony and carried it in his left shoe for protection and nutrition. He claimed it worked except during rain. Your common historical fact. Medieval travelers, especially pilgrims, carried durable snacks like honey cakes, hard biscuits, and dried fruit paste to sustain them on the road. These travel foods were made to last low moisture, high sugar, often dense with nuts, dried herbs, or spiritual symbolism. It whistles gently past the shutters, brushing your cheek through a crack in the stone wall like a cat testing whether it's welcome. You light a single beeswax candle. Its flame dances, casting soft shadows on the wood grain of your desk and the worn edges of the map you found tucked behind a chapel bench. And tonight you're about to follow that belief to the snacks that never traveled alone. Tonight the wind returns. The map is hand-drawn, curled at the corners, and smells like nutmeg. You think it's from the old apothecary's journal, one of those monks who believed that snacks could heal if given in the right dosage and at the right moment.